We are on the record.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome.
Good evening, everybody. It's Tuesday, May 14th. This is the Darien Planning and Zoning Commission. It is 8:05. We're in room 206 of Town Hall. We're going to start the hearing with the continuation of public hearing regarding business site plan application number 136D, special permit application number 231A, landfilling and regrading application number 455, George at Work, LLC, 2 Squab Lane. And are we immediately continuing?
Yes, you saw in your packets, the applicant has revised the plans to remove the handicap ramp and instead install a lift, which will get you from the bakery to the first floor of the restaurant. Over the lift will be a trellis, and then there's going to be a little pathway which would take you from the patio into the train station parking lot. Because of the changes to the exterior, we've advised the applicant that they'll need ARB review and a report. The ARB meets a week from tonight, so we've suggested to the applicant that the hearing be continued tonight to Tuesday, May 28th at 8 p.m. in this room, which I presume by then they'll have an ARB report. The commission has the revised plans. If you have any thoughts or concerns that you want me to relay in the meantime, let me know. If not, we'll continue this to the 28th.
Okay. You got my thoughts and concerns over the phone.
Yes.
Okay. So, perfect. So then we'll go to item number 2, continuation of public hearing regarding administrative section number 339, number 1-2019, Joseph Pagliarulo, sorry about that, 40 Swift Lane. So I think as I understand it, Jeremy and everybody else, we were just looking for the insertion of Steve's box.
It's required by zoning,
Yeah.
unless it gets waived. I think Seymour and Associates knows that. Why they don't do it, I don't know.
Okay, so we have the box?
Yeah, we do.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Zoning charts, Jeff McDougal from
Thank you, Jeff.
Associates, representing Joe Pagliarulo on this application. The zoning chart is on the survey now. This is a very unusual piece of property, obviously. We have section 339 of the regulations, which speaks to lots having less than the required lot width at the frontage. The minimum lot width, the minimum frontage for these lots in the R1 zone is 50 feet. So as long as you have 50 feet, you have the frontage, and it's not considered a rear lot. But if you have the building area of one lot behind another, according to section 339, you've got to add the front yard setback plus 50 feet. And that's why we've got the 90 feet for the portion of the house which is behind the other house there.
And that's
behind
all,
that buildable area.
And that's, and then the dimensions or the...
Right, that's shown on the submitted
Yeah,
plan.
it's all
submitted.
dimensioned on the site
Yeah.
plan.
I just want to make sure that I understand the setbacks. Well, first off, on your bottom chart, what's XXX mean?
Oh, right here, Jeff.
XXX on your chart?
Oh, that I guess I just never did the calculation for the 20% of the lot area. It's basically the same. We're looking around 8,700 square feet.
So why don't you
I'll make
fix
sure
that?
that gets fixed.
Okay. Then, what's the front yard, side yard, and rear yard on lot A?
On
Lot A is that.
Lot A, our front yard is 40 feet, side yard 25 feet.
Where's the 40 feet?
40 feet is basically a swung radius. The frontage on that lot is the 50.01 feet at the end of Swift's Lane. So if you follow that down, you'll see that the 40 feet for the frontage, do you want me to show you on there? Can you see it?
No, we got it.
Sure, Jeff.
Right, the front is along the street, so along that, I'll call it the can you show that thick black line, Jeff?
Yeah, this is the street
That's
line
the
right
frontage
here.
they have, so that's their 40 from there. And then the side touches the road at one point. So what Jeff's pointing to right now would be the side yard. So in this unusual circumstance, the front of the house faces the
I just saw the
side.
front side and rear, that's all.
Right, so that's the side yard off that property line that Jeff's showing
So the
Any,
front
any,
is
pro-
25.
any line which intersects a street
at one point.
at one point is considered a side yard.
Okay, the front yard is,
The front yard is off of
just
this
show where it says 40 in
and
front yard. Just where it says
Swiss Lane,
40.
the 50 feet of frontage.
Okay,
And that's the 40 feet, this line goes up along here, and then goes to the 25 feet.
you lost me, it's impossible. Okay, why don't you come over here a second?
Sure.
Is that the front yard?
Yes,
Yes,
that is the front yard,
So this is the front,
correct,
okay? This is the side,
correct.
okay? What's this?
That's a rear.
Here's the rear. Okay? And what's this?
That
Where's
is
where's the
the
other
camera
side?
view. This is your 40-foot rear yard off of the water. This is your,
Where does it say,
Cam-
where does it say
camera
40
view
feet?
didn't put that on there. It's, you know,
You've been doing this 100 years.
yeah.
I mean, you got four sides, front, side, and rear. That's an angle, that's one.
Well, it's so
This
far
is gonna-
beyond the
I understand
40
that, this
feet.
is gonna come up again.
Mhm.
Because there's no way someone's gonna build a lot that's 6.4% covered. It's not gonna happen. And you
Well,
know that,
Every
well,
upland.
right, but it's
But-
legal.
yeah, it's legal,
It's
yeah.
plenty legal,
Yeah.
okay? So let's try this one.
Hold on, are you okay with Lot A?
No,
Just-
because he doesn't have the 40-foot marker.
So we're gonna keep this open,
You
or
can
can?
close it and fix it, because he's
Okay.
gotta fix this, so.
Okay.
Yeah, you do. It's gotta be right, that's what we're submitting. You drew in a box, which is your conceptual building envelope, didn't you? Right, and it doesn't work it. This is your building envelope, right?
Correct,
Okay,
yes.
okay. So that's your building envelope, but you can't cross that line, that's why you're
Well,
only.
you
You
can.
can, it would have to get
Yeah,
a
it-
It's gotta
review.
come back.
requires, yeah, any development here has to come back before the commission
I understand
for
that.
approvals.
I want this to be right, okay? Then what about this one?
Okay, why don't you go back and see if you
I
can
can
do
point
it?
that out.
Yeah, yeah.
Could you stay by the microphone, please? I mean, your back is
Sure.
to the microphone. If you'd like to pick it up and carry it with you, that's fine.
Or move it back.
This one was.
Yeah, this-
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Thank you, Jeff.
Okay, what we've got here, this is considered a side yard,
That's the 25 feet.
25 feet, intersects the street.
Next,
Goes to a rear yard, because the property line deflects more than 60 degrees.
yep, next.
It's where the buildable area is behind the buildable area of Lot A. That is indicated by this line here. That has to be, that can be 40 feet there. That is considered a rear yard, because the sideline deflects more than 60 degrees.
Yep,
And then that changes to a 90-foot yard, which is the front yard plus 50 feet, giving us the 90 feet.
yep,
And that is behind the buildable area of Lot A.
great,
And then we have that 90 feet continues down through, and
great.
then it is 40 feet off of the water there. And so that gives you all of the setbacks on that lot.
Dave told us the 90 feet like 2 years ago. So you got 40, 25, 40,
Correct.
and then kind of 90. There's nothing going this way though, right?
But you gotta define this way, because you can't see what you
To
just
the
did.
south. Is that south? There's nothing going due towards the water.
Gorham's Pond.
There's still, the 90-foot extends there, and then it would be 40 feet
40
off.
feet off of the water. That would be a rear yard also.
So where's the 40 feet off of the water?
Just show 'em.
Here would be the 40 feet.
Let's say 40 feet there.
Yeah,
Where?
right at that point there, that would be the 40 feet.
I understand it. Does it say 40 feet out here?
Hmm?
Does it say 40 feet on the map, on the survey?
No, it got left off. I don't know why.
Okay, so we can add that too. Okay, so you're gonna add a 40-foot marker there. You're gonna add, take out your X's, and you're gonna put whatever's missing on lot A. Okay?
What was that?
Whatever's missing on lot A, you're missing one on lot A.
The
also.
40 feet was here, was missing. Those two dimensions were missing.
Jeremy, you got it?
Yep, got it.
Thank you. As long as those three things are done, I'm fine.
Anybody else? Anybody from the public? All right, so we can close with the
Yep.
understanding that
Right, this isn't changing anything, it's just clarifying.
clarifying that it
Right, and
fits our,
complies with the regulations.
I don't want to call it subdivision regulations, right?
Correct.
Okay. So with all that, can I get a motion to close this public hearing?
Motion to close.
All in favor?
Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff.
Thanks. All right, so this is continuation of public hearing. And I'm going to open the next two items so I don't run into the same problem I had at the last public hearing. I apologize to everybody, Mr. Maslin, who was here. So continuation of public hearing regarding amendments to Darien zoning regulations, COZR number 1, 2019, and the Darien zoning map, COZM number 1, 2019, put forth by the Darien Planning and Zoning Commission. And then the second one is amendments to the Darien, to the zoning map, COZM number 3, 2019, put forth by the Darien Planning and Zoning Commission. So I guess, Jeremy, help me out with
Sure,
how we
what we
should
can do
probably
is
do this.
start with what we've been calling the business-related zoning map and regulation amendments. We can talk a little bit about those and then leave the municipal use part of that request
With the map changes.
with the map changes. So we can talk about everything about the MU zone. I know there's some people here who are interested in some of the combinations of the zones. This is a continuation from a number of other public hearings. In terms of what's been submitted since the last public hearing in April, you may recall that we got, at that public hearing on April 11th, since then, I think you've gotten, Mr. Mahalski was here, he spoke, you may recall it was in the Mather Center. We have an email from him, which was basically, I believe the commission has it. Others, petitions were submitted April 11th from neighbors. You may remember Mr. Tibbetts, Al, and John were at that meeting in the Mather Center. Craig Flaherty submitted his April 11th letter about parklands. Lori Bora submitted a letter. Amy Zavatakis was here. Mr. Maslin. The Criscolos were here. Joe Kelly.
Yeah.
So.
But not much since the last.
Nothing has been submitted in writing other than that summary of his comments from Mr. Mihalski since within the past month on those other issues. Restaurants, combining the SB and SBE.
So why don't we go through the,
Sure.
as the agenda reads, like one through
Sure.
it, and just avoiding the MU stuff until the end. If anybody has any additional comments on those issues, I'll pause after each item. So address the existing convenience food service issue by creating a new restaurant categories which will not limit or restrict outdoor seating.
Right, you may.
Indoor, I'm sorry, yeah.
Right, you may
Indoor
recall that
seating.
one of the issues we currently have, the commission's been working on, is the definition of convenience food service. Think Sono Bakery or Roost limits the amount of indoor seating. And the commission asked Glenn Chalder of Planometrics to look in a new way of defining restaurants. And so the proposal this evening is to make a new definition of quick service restaurant. And so that's a change. And then we've had to also say which zones will allow quick service restaurants. And I think in every zone that it is allowed, it's allowed by special permit. That way the commission can review.
And all parking requirements would be
Parking,
reviewed.
right,
on
section
anything
904 had
that-
to be amended,
Yeah.
and then there had to be a definition in section 210 for a quick service restaurant. So,
So if anything was changed to a quick service, if they wanted to enhance their business with additional seating, the commission would have another look to ensure there was adequate parking.
correct. So the commission, if this passes, you could see in a few months from now, a number of convenience food service type restaurants coming to the commission to modify that restriction which had been previously placed upon them.
Okay, so I'll pause there. Any other questions from the commission? Any public comment on this issue?
Just like one comment.
Let me
Sure.
just add one thing.
Yeah, go ahead.
You just said, create a definition of quick, we're just adding the definition.
You're adding,
It's not something that we invented. That's an-
QSR? Yeah,
well,
that's
the
an
term
industry
is,
standard.
term
yeah,
is an industry standard, but the
yeah. But we
definition
define it, yeah.
was,
The definition's being added.
the definition's being added, that's a good way, in section 210, and it relates to how you order.
I just want to make sure your wording's correct.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you, Jeremy.
Sir?
Yes, Joe,
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm Joe Criscuolo, one of the owners of 168 West Avenue. And I'd just like to point out that the city, we're in favor of what the city wants, and the city did hire an expert, and the neighbors actually, they don't have an expert, they didn't hire anybody. So I find it, difficult to go to, I guess, that the commission would go with their point of view when they haven't hired anyone to, substantiate what they.
Okay, I think you're off topic. What you're talking about is this service business zone and
Right.
that sort of thing.
This
That's
is not
coming
that
up
topic.
just right now.
Oh, I'm
why-
sorry.
Yeah, no. Why don't you just stand there, because that's our
Okay,
next item.
I'm
Anybody else have any comments? Okay, so then we'll go combining certain business zones within the community. To your point.
Right,
It's
when I-
literally the next one, combining the SB and SBE zones to service business zone. So to take your comments, I'll start with 2A. Anybody, well, we'll take your comments and
Right.
we'll discuss it. So your comment was that you brought in an
Well, the city hired that
Who's the
gentleman.
city? You mean-
The
This is
town
the
of
town,
Darien, yeah,
sorry.
yeah.
When I go to Newark, I call them a
Yeah,
town,
yeah.
I come to Darien, I call them the city. So, we hired that expert.
Glenn Chalder,
Right. and
our
he was-
planner.
Right, and he had, done some studies and said it's, it's good for the
Yeah.
community to have these local restaurants, and, the size was fine. So the neighbors were opposed, and I think, they're misguided, obviously, because, everybody's always scared of something different, something new. And so, I'd just like to say that, that's important that the town hired that expert, and, the neighbors should respect that as well, that, there's a backing to the point, and
Okay.
so I just wanted to mention.
Thanks. And Jeremy, you want to just talk about the service business east and just combining the two? and
Sure.
then-
This is summarized in the February 15, 2019 memo to the Planning and Zoning Commission, which obviously got a couple months ago, which is about 50-some pages
Yeah,
long.
yeah.
But it does talk about, let's start with service business and service business east, would allow the following uses in areas presently zoned. It would allow more uses in the service business zone, which is the zone that Mr. Criscolo's property is in at
Yeah.
168 West Avenue. So you're giving more uses in that zone. And it talks about some yard requirements would change because we're consolidating service business and service business east. Service business east is the area down by Bertucci's and TD Bank near the Norwalk line. And so there would be some different uses, and what the main issue that's been discussed numerous times is right now there's a requirement for restaurants to have at least 1,200 square feet of indoor space devoted to customer tables and seating. And that requirement is proposed to be removed in the service business zone as part of this proposal. And we've heard testimony, as Mr. Criscolo has acknowledged, both from people in favor of that and people opposed to that.
Okay, and what's amazing is it's just this one requirement, the 1,200 square feet, that kind of separates the two zones, where the service business east does not have that minimum, right?
Right, the service, there are some other differences, but that seems to be
that
the main
seems
one
to
that
be the
has
one,
come out
okay.
during the hearing
So when
process.
we deliberate, this is going to be the focus of our discussion, and whether or not we decide to combine those two zones, I think, because that was clearly the one fulcrum point of differential, I think. I think the setbacks and such, maybe not as impactful. Okay, because we didn't hear much comment on that. 2B, combining the OB DOR1 and the DOR5 zones into a newly created designated office DO zone.
Right, that is covered also on page 11 of that memo, which talks about the DB1 and DB2 zones are proposed to be merged to remove the distinctions and create additional opportunities for development. And there's some changes in dimensional standards. The designed office zones, oh, I'm sorry, I jumped the gun, but the office zones, OB, DOR, really, we're combining those office zones, and certain uses in those zones will, which now require a special permit, would be, only require a zoning permit. Shared office operations will be clearly identified as a permitted use. Medical or dental offices will now be permitted in that zone, provided adequate parking is available. and medical or dental clinics will become a permitted use. So again, giving a broader range to what used to be considered executive and administrative offices, loosening up those uses for those.
Now, the one comment Mr. Flaherty had, and we might have kind of missed this when we published the public notice, was the senior daycare.
Correct. Mr. Flaherty's letter dated April 11th said, in general, the owners, which is the owners of 3 parklands, support the amendments, including the addition of uses like medical and dental clinics. The owners continue to evaluate options, and they wanted to retain a hotel use in the regulations. We'll talk later about hotel use. And I think he did talk about adult daycare, or maybe even private school has come up as well.
Yeah, well, private school is available in one of the zones, right? Because we
so.
did change, so,
So that might be a subsequent proposal to this.
okay.
On the old Kings Highway, private school.
Yeah.
Right, 85
Yeah.
Old Kings
Yeah.
Highway, that was discussed for that.
Okay, so just when, as we deliberate this, if there's a way that we can potentially include any verbiage around senior daycare, or if we can't do that, then make it clear that, you know, we discussed it as a possibility.
Okay.
All right. Anybody else want to talk about the OB-DOR1, DOR5 zones, DO? All right. Combining the DB1 and DB2 zones into a newly created designated business zone. Design, sorry, thank you. Keep correcting me, can't see. Got anything?
DB1, DB2, I think I covered that out of order.
Okay. So that was all in the
Right, that was-
DOR,
yeah.
okay.
That's more towards retail, correct?
No, DB1, DB2 would be the area, I'll call it east of 800 Post Road. I'll call it the transition zone on Boston Post Road, eastern part, which does not allow retail, because we want the retail to be downtown. And so it really, that zone is designed to kind of maintain the character, the smaller Victorian-looking houses,
And if
small
I,
offices.
yeah, and
which is
if
what
I
you see through
remember,
there.
sorry to cut you off, these two zones were, I mean, extremely similar to one
Very-
another.
very
It's
similar.
Just so slight differences in setbacks, and I think that was it, right? I mean,
There are some nuances. They're both designed to deter combining lots, because what we didn't want was someone buying in all these small houses, taking them down, and building big office buildings. So really, we're gonna keep that disincentive in, but it does make sense. In some ways, the uses permitted are very similar,
yeah, that's what I was getting at.
right?
All right, anybody?
There is flexibility in those zones. We just approved the renovation of a building in that zone.
Yeah, you can remember the Salt Cave, there's 2 Salt Caves, 693 Post Road, is currently being redone by Mr. Fletcher.
Correct, that's what I was talking about.
Yeah, so there's a number of properties that are undergoing renovation.
But the key is it's a transition zone and deters the concept of accumulating properties and putting in a big office building or something
Yep.
like that. Okay. Okay, so number 3, amendments to I'm going to skip that. I'm going to go to 4, allow restaurants by special permit in the 3 neighborhood business zones.
Right now, there's 3 neighborhood business zones in town. If you think of Tokenique Road near 5 Mile River Road, Boston Post Road in Norotan, near Norotan Avenue, and the Maple Street, Norotan Avenue corner there. And as you can think of, Tokenique Road and near 5 Mile River, there's what's Jennifer's Kitchen, used to be Lobster Craft before that. There's been a White Bridge Deli before that, longtime restaurant location. In Norotan, you have Mama Carmela's, you have Papa Joe's right there. Now you have Roost across the street, which is, I'll call it more quick service. So the question is, do we want to allow restaurants by special permit, which traditionally has not been allowed, although there's some grandfathered in restaurants?
Yes.
Where's the third location?
Maple and Norotan, if you think of where that hair salon is and the florist,
Oh, the little-
that small white building that's there.
And the guy across, what's the guy across the street? Jake's Deli? Jake's?
Jake's would be Ledge Road, that is, I don't
I
know
don't
what
think
zone they're
that's
in. That might be
No.
too far away.
Yeah.
You're good.
Okay, so anybody want to talk about restaurants and neighborhood use? No, seeing none, no move along. Allowing personal service uses by right in the DC zone, Goodwives and Regrading West.
Right. Those two DC areas are permitted to remain. One of the big concerns the commission's had is Goodwives Shopping Center, which has well over 400 parking spaces and has turned into a lot of personal service uses. If you think of limber stretching and the salon, and there's a number of other
And
personal
every
service.
time Commissioner Mulvaney asks why we're seeing the thing, given the ample parking at both locations, Leroy West doesn't have any businesses other than a
So this would
commercial
allow
parking.
such personal service uses as of right for that zone.
Any comments here? Seeing none, go ahead, sir.
Just a question. I mean,
Yeah.
are we doing this simply so that individuals, entities who wanted to add personal services in the DC zone don't have to come to us? They just do it as right.
Yeah.
Correct. Barber shop, nail salon.
And this is a burden on us or them?
Yeah, I mean, it would be them too, because they'd have to file a special permit and come in.
Right. It makes it easier for them to get such tenants because they don't need commission review or action. On the other hand, there's no commission review or action, so if,
The thought, at least as I understood it, the reason why this regulation exists is to ensure that there's adequate parking in the zone.
right,
And-
parking,
and
traffic, and those things.
Goodwives is not a problem, and Leroy West doesn't have a business there. We would assume if they did do something there, they'd have to create adequate parking for, Leroy West is the Coons lot, right? So
Correct.
we're really talking about Goodwives in reality, and we've seen in my tenure many special permit applications for personal service, and Steve every time asks.
It's not required for Neuron Heights either. I've never seen it required.
All right, I'm just.
Yeah, so we're trying
Curious as to why.
to take some burden off of
True.
everything. We don't have that downtown though, right? Service businesses. don't
Right,
they-
downtown, the commission will still have the
Yeah.
ability to, a special permit would just be a good
Where
wise.
parking is a little more pinched.
Yep.
All right, good question. Modify the parking requirements and add new parking requirements for certain categories. 904, 906, 908, 944.
Right.
So as I understand it, a lot of this is a result, of some of the zoning changes we're doing.
Correct. Defining quick service restaurant, parking standard for that, eliminating some parking standards, like dinner theater, for example, that will no longer be allowed. Clarifying and better designated full-service restaurant, better definition of medical dental offices and/or medical dental clinic, clarifying the definition for self-storage facility and business and professional offices, and relettering, putting everything in different order, which has been reorganized for years. So, and then there's some minor changes to some of the parking setbacks in section 906.6.
Okay. Any questions up here? In the audience? Seeing none, go forward. Okay. So delete certain, wait, I'm on 7 now, right?
Yes.
Shouldn't you move
Wait,
to 8?
7?
I think I covered 7, because I
Okay.
said in 7, the commission at the same time is deleting
Thank you.
parking requirements for uses which are no longer permitted in the regulations.
Yeah.
As the example I gave, the dinner theater, and the commission will have to decide hotels, motels, and inns. If you eliminate that, we'll eliminate the parking requirement. If you keep it in, we'll keep the parking requirement.
I guess I still am conflicted about deleting the option of having like an inn.
Yeah.
I'm really
Me too.
conflicted.
Yeah.
Roger Sherman, something like that, I think actually would
Yeah.
benefit the community.
Okay. So we're going to deliberate that during deliberations? Because I'm a similar,
Similar, okay.
Ms. Riva was I don't want to put words in her mouth. She was opposed to maintaining that. So we'll decide, when we have a bigger group, whether or not to maintain that. And so that goes into number 8 right there. And then that would flow back to number 7, okay? So thank you for raising that, because that was a concern of, I think, a few of ours.
If I can just say.
Yeah, go ahead, sure.
So technically, 8 should go before 7 on your.
8 and 7 are very related, because if you're proceeding with 8, you're proceeding with 7,
Yeah.
relative to the
Right.
hotels.
If you're keeping 8, then you're not doing so.
Correct, other than dinner theater.
So we're on the same page.
Yep.
Okay, so we'll go to number 9, greatly expanded uses within Darien's office zones, allowing 3-story buildings and newly created office zone, reducing the number of office zones from 3 down to 1.
This very much relates to item 2B, which we discussed earlier, combining office business, DOR 1, DOR 5. Again, what the commission talked about many, many years ago was the concept of office parks for executive and administrative offices. And then slowly over time, it was felt that giving office park owners a little more flexibility on their tenants, smaller tenants, the ability to have medical clinics, dental clinics, those types of things. So to expand the number of uses in those zones, and also the fact now the commission would specifically allow 3-story buildings in those office zones. You can see the Parklands building is a 3-story building, and the other building next to it is a 2-story building with underground parking, or at-grade parking from the back, if you will. So it really would make it easier to administer the office zones from a staff standpoint, and easier for the office park tenants and landlords.
And it's fascinating just looking at how the market has changed. You would probably know this better than I do, but how the market changed and how medical services have kind of localized, if you will, and decentralized. And I might have even been in a commission where we just started to approve some rehab facilities and medical facilities, which was kind of unheard of only, 5 or 6 years ago, maybe 8.
It's a booming business
Yeah.
now.
So,
It's because of the healthcare insurance.
which is in a way embellishing our office space, which in many ways would probably be struggling without these offices.
Correct. It's very helpful.
Cool. So we're keeping up with the trends, I guess. Number 10, I didn't ask if anybody would want to talk to, don't see any. Number 10, clarifying drive-throughs. What zones should allow drive-through restaurants and which zones?
Right, the commission spent a lot of time discussing and being clearer in the regulations as to what zones you want to allow drive-through windows, drive-up window, drive-up ATM, or a similar type of facility. So the proposal in the regulations allows them usually as an accessory use requiring a special permit. So you can look at what impacts it might have on traffic or people queuing up to use the ATM or the drive-through window, and making sure there's enough room for people to queue up. There's a couple drive-ins now, if you will, Duchess, and then the Blue Wave Taco.
Yeah, well, is
And
it
then
still
there's a couple drive-up ATMs at various banks.
Yeah.
So to clarify that, now in the regulations, it'll be clear which zones allow such uses. So we'll talk about that during the deliberations as well.
Okay, and then clarify which zones will specifically allow parking structures.
As parking structures become more likely, if you will, and some will soon be built.
And
You'll see-
approved, yeah.
And approved, the commission wanted to be clear on what zones it would be appropriate to have above-ground parking structures. And I think in every case, they're allowed only as an accessory use by special permit.
Okay, and then, don't see anybody raising their hand. And then lastly, this is the all-important changing the regional planning agency, the Western Connecticut Council of Governments, WestCOG. I think that's pretty straightforward.
That's
We
a
don't really
straightforward
have
change.
just a change in the definition. Okay, so now,
Can I ask one last
yeah, go. Excuse
With
me.
regards to Fred's fancy chart, that's not a change, that's just an addition.
Right, as Steve mentioned, there's going
The
to be a
Ovani
new
chart.
appendix in the regulations, which, once the commission makes their decision, will be I'll call it, a chart which will enable people at a glance to see all the setbacks and requirements for the different zones in town. So until the commission decides what zones will be merged and not merged, and what numbers may change, that's a little bit limbo, but the bottom line will be that new appendix, which will go in the back of the zoning regulations, which will be
It's
a
an
one-stop
appendix.
shopping for people who do this for a living.
Okay.
Okay.
So I'll
Thank
pop back to number 3, amendments to municipal use zone, modify section 420. These revisions are intended to clarify the nature of the MU zone as an overlay zone. And then the next agenda item, amendments to zoning map number COZM number 3, 2019, put forth by the Darien Zoning Commission. I'm going to just go on a little. Proposed to amend the Darien zoning map to include certain municipally owned properties and/or properties that fulfill a municipal function, in the municipal use overlay zone as provided for section 420 of the Darien zoning regulations. And there's a list of properties which we already read in the agenda. So does anybody want to have any comment before we open it up to the public on this one? Okay, thank you. What are we looking at? Just
This is, Mr. Maslin gave this to me right before the meeting, and he's going to speak to it
Okay.
when he gets up to the.
So what I'd love to do is open it up to the public that, hasn't had the opportunity to speak. And then we'll allow Mr. Maslin and whoever else has spoken on this item. So would anybody like to speak on this item?
I'd like to speak, but I'd like to hear what Bob has.
Oh, you want to go for it? Okay. Okay. Let me just, anybody else that would like to speak before Mr. Maslin that hasn't spoken before? Okay, Mr. Maslin.
Would it be okay if I said I wanted to hear from Bruce?
That's called a circular reference.
Kind of hoping, and I'd like to hear what Bruce has to say and comment on that as well.
Yeah.
Bruce and I have been doing this for, I don't know, 20-something years. Getting on it.
I'm guessing you a little longer than him, but it's just a guess.
What?
You're a couple of years ahead of his experience.
My hair is grayer than his.
Oh, my.
There we go.
All right. For the record, my name is Robert Maslin, and I'm an attorney in Darien, as you know, and I represent people who are on Mansfield Avenue and Middlesex Road abutting the Oxford School property, Francisco Rivero and Maria Carlson, Michael and Lisa Alfieri, John and Martha Hendrickson, some of whom are here. I don't think they're going to speak unless they think of something really spectacular that you haven't heard before. But a lot has been said so far. At the last session of this public hearing, the commission suggested that I submit some proposed revisions, and I've done that. A letter went in dated April 30th, and it's my typical format where I go through the regs and then I have a comment section that kind of tracks section by section where it's relevant. The one thing I had intended to provide, which for some reason, because of electronics, didn't make it, was a markup, because as I converted it over to PDF, for some reason, the markings didn't come up. That's what I just handed you.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. That's
So
what's up.
it
Okay.
would be easier to walk through those when as I go through this. But as a preliminary thing, in the letter, I mentioned two things that I think were either oversights or typos. One is, in the current regulations, the MU zone building coverage is down as 20%. And the commission some time ago increased that to 25%. I think it was in relation to
Old Town Hall.
the Old Town Hall Homes application. For some reason, that 25% didn't make it to the current version of the reg. So I discussed it with Jeremy, and I wanted to just point that out for the record so you'd have some basis to fix that. The second is, in your proposed map, the colored-in area for the Oxford School property was inaccurate. It included properties on Middlesex, and I wanted to, here you go. Jeremy just handed me this proposed amendments. I think this is amended amendments, which looks like
Fix the problem.
fixes the problem.
You want to just pass that?
Because I don't think, I know my clients would not want their properties to be
And that
zoned
wasn't
as-
the intent.
And I got that. That's why I mentioned
Thank
it as a typo or oversight. Okay.
It's in the inset box.
So now we can go through this handout, and there are only a couple of general areas where I wanted to make specific suggestions. One, as you know, and I've talked about this already during the last session, was to leave this as a floating zone rather than an overlay zone. But and so throughout this section, the word overlay changed to floating. But in the preamble, section 20,
Can I just stop you there?
Yes.
Because I want to keep consistent use of terminology through the regs. I mean, that's been what we've tried to do for a few years now.
yes.
The difference in your mind between an overlay zone and a floating zone. An overlay zone is set at a distinct
It's fixed.
area over another zone,
Correct.
where a floating zone,
Floating zone, you have to land it.
okay,
And in your preamble, as it's written today, says that the floating zone shall be granted only where the commission determines the appropriateness of a particular location. And it also says, not all municipal existing or proposed uses or properties will be appropriate for the municipal zone. And I think that, to me, demonstrates an intent to have this as a case-by-case type floating zone where the commission is in a position to say, that works here, or it doesn't work in another situation.
or there's a need
Or
here,
it works
there's
in a limited way, and you have the flexibility in the way you apply it.
Don't you always have that flexibility, though?
You have to change the zone.
Yeah.
So somebody could come in for a zone change. The problem with that is, at some point, it starts to look like spot zoning. But the floating zone, I don't consider spot zoning because, for a whole variety of reasons, but it involves uses that are already allowed.
No, I'm sorry, just to be clear, my question was.
So
under the-
floating versus overlay. Overlay is, like, take the DBR.
I get-
Right, it's in an area, it's in the DB1, DB2 zones, it's got boundaries, that's where it belongs, and that's Old Town Hall Homes. And that was set up for that particular project. It's been used in other, perhaps other situations, or
Okay.
could be.
I need
All
to
right,
ask you a
But that's the
question.
difference,
I need-
that's the difference.
I got it, I need to ask you a question. As the regs are written now, you can pick and choose which aspects of the regs to use, the municipality can use. So what came up as the 8-foot setback doesn't require to use the 8-foot setback. If you were to apply the zone floating, as the zone exists now, you wouldn't necessarily have to use that 8-foot setback. You can pick and
Sure.
choose the elements. I just want to
Makes-
clarify that.
It's a two-step process. One, you're making a zone change by deciding to apply a floating zone
Understood.
to a particular site.
Yeah,
If you make it an overlay zone, you've already done that.
understood.
And that's tougher to say, well, you can't use the 8-foot setback because it's in the floating zone. And if the site qualifies for floating
You
zone,
didn't answer my question. You're trying to, I'm saying, as it
Maybe I'm
stands
just-
now, if a floating zone is applied to a property, you can or cannot, the commission can or cannot, or has the choice of implementing certain provisions throughout that MU reg.
that would be
Okay.
special permit, yes.
Thank you.
Special
That's-
permit considerations.
That's what I wanted to clarify.
But you do have to take that step of landing the floating zone
Understood,
first,
understood.
all right? And that's a zone change, which is a legislative change. It's an easier decision if somebody wants to appeal because it's a legislative change, not an administrative decision. So it's a better tool for you because you can, once you make that decision, it's treated differently than, say, a special permit on appeal.
100%.
Okay?
yeah.
All right. But the other change I made in section 421 is I added in a paragraph that is intended to encourage municipal applicants to come to the commission informally to lay out some conceptual plans and get your feedback at the very beginning. This is done in other settings. It's done in the conservation development setting, and anybody can come in and, on a preliminary basis, informally and get feedback. I think that this is beneficial for the municipal users because, and for the commission, because it brings you into the planning process, right? You have, what is it, 824, where you have to pass on improvements to municipal property, which is a whole separate statutory requirement.
Mandatory referral.
Mandatory, it's a mandatory referral. But instead of having a building committee in one of the town agencies or housing authority, whatever, go through the whole planning process and then come in and say, this is our plan. And you look at it and you say, what do we do now? They spent hundreds of thousands of dollars setting up this plan, and there's issues here we don't like. Catch those at the very beginning so they can be incorporated
I
into the
find it
planning
amazing
process.
we're having even, I mean, I know they've been in discussions with Jeremy.
I got that, but come to you. I've been
Yeah,
to you
well,
a
but
number of times.
in a way, you don't even need that provision. They're open to. And, you know, I find it interesting that there's certain neighbors that have been more involved in the planning process than this commission
Maybe.
at this point.
But if they come to you, you're in
Yeah.
the ground.
No, it's interesting. It's like-
You are a planning commission.
Yeah.
All right,
Yeah.
which gives you that, a separate hat. Okay. The next area is in the area and bulk requirements, and I go back to what I said before. The area and bulk requirements that are in the existing MU zone were proposed and approved in the context of specific proposals, the library, and more recently, Old Town Hall Homes. And one of the things I did here was, and if you skip over to the page with the table on it,
It's 4-3, basically.
4-4.
Skip
This-
to 4-4,
Yeah. It looks like this.
other table. Got it.
Okay. I took the existing setbacks, front, side, and rear, listed them for the various properties that are in this proposal. And I wanted to illustrate, I don't want to call it a flip-flop necessarily, but it kind of is. When the library was proposed, it was proposed in and around zones that had setbacks of 0 to 4 feet in the SB zone, 8 feet in the R1/5 zone, which was eventually abutting the property, and the OB zone was 10 feet. And the MU zone increased those 0 to 4 and 8-foot setbacks to 10 feet. What's proposed now is to have this 8-foot setback, at least as a possibility, apply in the other zones. But you're doing the opposite, right? You're greatly reducing the setbacks instead of enlarging them.
Go
In a
to Old
particular
Town
site.
Hall Homes, what do we do there?
I think what you did there was first have a debate on whether the MU zone would apply there as a municipal use in the first place.
Yeah.
And I think over time, you worked through the process and ended up
No, to your point.
locating it, again, site by site, you know, case
But
by
but
case
but
basis.
it borders a residential zone, so help.
does.
Yeah, so what did it do, the setbacks?
But you had bigger setbacks. You
So
ended up
it
with larger
decreased-
setbacks.
We ended up with larger setbacks, but we could have decreased them to 8 feet, right? Yeah, okay.
That's your commission in a particular situation where there's a large enough site. But you may have another commission 5 years from now that is not taking the same approach that this commission takes. And where does that leave the neighbors? It leaves the neighbors with a 3-story building 8 feet from their property line.
There's a lot of ifs along the
Potentially.
way, yeah.
And that's the whole key. And again, just to get back to this
Yeah.
floating zone, it helps because it encourages the first step. And it encourages some feedback from the commission before they get too far down the road and have setbacks that are just not acceptable to the neighbors. And certainly, the way this is now in residential zones, public schools are of right uses.
Yeah.
As long as they comply, and there's nothing wrong with that. The neighbors own properties, they buy a property next to a school, it's gonna get rebuilt someday, and it'll have the same setbacks if you leave it of right. If they need help with height, consider the floating zone, applying the floating zone and working
Okay, so
through
your
the process.
proposal is to maintain the setbacks amongst schools only?
No, just as an example. Could be anything. It could be any municipal use.
Oh, this is just
Not just-
narrative, this is not a,
This is,
Got it,
this
got
is
it.
narrative,
Okay.
yeah.
This is coming.
But the other
Yeah,
thing
got
I
it,
did
sorry.
here was I suggested that the setbacks in the MU zone, in areas where you land them, be either the minimum of the underlying zone or what's in the table here,
So.
which is the way
which
it
table,
worked in
I'm
the
sorry?
original library project. It was,
So, I'm sorry, I'm lost now.
you take
I'm on
the set, I'm
four-
on
four still?
4-3,
Okay,
looks like this,
yeah,
John.
yeah, I got it.
Okay. Those are the setbacks for the MU zone, and the change that I made in the notes and in the preliminary section, part of section 424, the intent there is to have the setbacks of the underlying zone apply as a minimum, or the MU zone setbacks apply if they're greater. So in other words.
The greater
you
of,
apply the
yeah.
greater of, and that is analogous or similar to the way it worked with the library. Because the MU zone setbacks ended up a couple of feet higher than in the underlying zone. And that, I think that was the idea, where you're building a bigger building, you got more height, move it a little bit farther away from the boundaries and not closer to the boundaries. And that would be consistent with the original way that the original MU zone site worked. The way you work through Old Town Hall Homes did the same thing, but it took working through the project to get there. If you had it in the regs in the first place, where you had to meet the minimum setbacks, it would be an easier exercise, because the applicant and the building
get it.
committee would have a very specific set of rules to apply.
So Jeremy, question, I understand the, well, just one sec. I understand we got further away from the residential setbacks at Old Town Hall Homes. You recall if we got,
No, I think in this case, it's a corner lot, the corner of Academy and Boston Post Road, so there's two front yards. And the rear yard, if I recall, there was no relief sought on the rear yard. Those folks facing, I think it's Fairview Avenue in the back. And I don't think there was any relief granted on, I'll call it, the paramedic side,
Yeah.
if you will, the east side of the property.
Okay.
So I don't think they, and Bruce Hill is here, who was the attorney for that. I don't recall any relief on the setbacks. I think the relief here on that project was more building height.
yeah, and then we redistributed
coverage.
the building height and coverage away from the residential properties
To more
closer.
center that, if you
Or
will.
towards Post Road, basically,
right.
and Academy, the corner of Post and Academy,
Correct.
if you will.
That's,
The only thing that I would add to that is the architect and land planner for the project moved it where they wanted it and made sense. I mean, we didn't tell them.
We told them to move the height because of the comments from the neighbors. So we redistributed the intensity of, is that the same footprint that was proposed? But if you look at where the building height was distributed, more was distributed up front versus that back wing, if you will, right? Yeah, because it was one kind of, I don't know how they did it to
There
get
were
the
some
same number.
changes to the back of the
Yeah, the
building.
back of the building brought the height down, yeah.
Yeah, we took
Yeah.
a story off.
And then it was redistributed in a way,
Yeah, we did.
redesigned, if you
Yes,
will.
no, you're right.
Okay.
I think
Three-bedroom to a
Yeah.
two-bedroom.
that what I suggested here, to have the underlying zone setbacks be the minimums, accomplishes the same thing, but it does it in a much more definitive way, because it sets up those setbacks. And I don't know of any of these properties in town where you have existing nonconformities that can't be cured if you knock down and rebuild a building. I keep focusing on Ox Ridge School because my clients are around it. That's like 12 acres, 10 acres, something in that range, and there's plenty of land. There's even plenty of land if you take the 50-foot setback from the common boundary between the residential properties, the front on the road. The back property of those is common with the Ox Ridge. You could still go back 100 feet and still have plenty of room for a good-sized building.
You agree with that? Anyway, I'm not just joking with you. I'm not calling you
But-
out on that. No, let me stop you there. You had one distinct assumption, though. You tear down and rebuild.
Well, sure.
There's no.
But the high school tore down and rebuilt.
Correct.
All right,
but
and
the
that ended up-
That had a piece of property that you could pull off both without encroaching on the setbacks, if I'm aware.
Right.
It was the building height that caused the problem.
Sure, and look
Yeah,
what happened. I mean, there's a whole mess with
An
appeals.
entire mess that wouldn't have happened if we had the MU zone.
Exactly.
Yeah, so. Go ahead, sir.
Bob, you said that you tear down a building that's non-conforming, you rebuild it, you gotta conform, basically. I think that's what I heard you say, is that correct?
These larger school sites, I think that's true. And with respect to setbacks.
Okay, but should it be true of both residential and municipal use?
It usually is.
Edifices?
It usually is.
I mean,
If you
because-
knock down a house that's non-conforming, when you rebuild it, you have to build it to conform, or you have to get variances.
Okay, well, maybe that's what I did. I mean, 100 Leroy was not conforming. And my daughter tore it down
Okay.
and put up a building that had exactly the same footprint as the building that was there. It was still non-conforming. So how did that happen?
Did she get a variance?
100, Leroy?
Yeah.
I'm not familiar with that.
What typically happens? Don't use 100
Yeah.
Leroy.
Typically, from what I know, you need a variance.
Okay, then we must have gotten one.
Must have gotten one. I'm sure your
Probably
daughter
struck
was.
that from your memory.
Otherwise
There's
I'm in trouble.
There's a gentleman right here that would make sure that it was all
Okay, all right.
according to the rules
All right, I
before he
understand.
signed the zoning permit.
I tore down my garage. I'm on a non-conforming lot. Go get a variance.
God bless
We
you.
must have gotten one.
You must have.
You would have made sure.
Or it somehow ended up complying. But that's really the intent of this. And the one other point is that extra 50 feet that applies to the Ox Ridge property as a rear lot, where you have 2 times the minimum setback, it only applies to the setback, not the extra 50 feet. So you wouldn't be going from 100 to 200 feet. You'd be going from 100 to
50 to 100.
100 to 150. Right, because you're taking the 50 and you're doubling it, and you're adding
Yes.
50 feet. So instead of going from 100 to 200, you're going to, it's a clarification, really, because I don't think your intent was on a rear lot, you double the setback plus the extra 50 feet.
No, I mean,
It's
that's
just the setback, and you still add the 50 feet. That's just a clarification. I also have provisions in here for things like screening, and you also have note A, minimum side and/or rear yards may be reduced to the minimum allowed in the underlying zone, provided the commission determines the location of the building and mechanical equipment, et cetera, is adequately screened from abutting properties. I think that was the original intent. I'm sure we'll hear from Bruce on that. And that's it. I mean, that summarizes the different
So to
intents.
summarize kind of your stance is you're advocating for some amendments, but maintain a floating zone and define it as a
Maintain the
floating
floating
zone.
zone.
Yeah. And then clarify certain things and the setbacks.
Clarify how the setbacks work.
Interestingly, you're by modifying it, you're creating some more stringent things that are currently written into the regulation in regarding setbacks.
Right.
Yes.
But when you look at this in the library situation, to make a higher building, the setbacks were increased.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right? When you apply it in the other zones, it's a dramatic reduction in setback.
Yeah.
You must have recognized that in Old Town
Yeah, I
Homes,
mean-
because there was a whole discussion.
Yeah.
And I think if you set it up with the minimum setbacks in the underlying zone as a starting point, you can have a much more a productive
I mean,
discussion. So
I
they're
take
not
ex-
starting
yeah.
out assuming that they can go down to 8 feet.
I take exception to future P and Z commissions might not be as thoughtful as we are, but that's an assumption that, you know, I'll let you deal with them
I'm
5
not
years from now.
assuming.
No, I'm joking.
What I'm
but-
saying is, we don't,
Yeah.
well, I don't know. I mean, 20 years ago, we wouldn't be having this conversation at all.
Right. But
20
that same
years
P and Z
ago-
commission could change the regs. I mean,
Of
you know,
course.
back to what they are. So, you know,
Right.
my mind is you elect responsible people for this and hope that they, you know, represent the community at large. So
Right, except.
I don't want to make those assumptions, I guess, in
No,
our
I- no,
deliberations.
It's a what if,
Yeah.
not that future commissions are not going to act in the best interest of the town. But it's
get
the
it.
town residents that elect them, not the neighbors around one particular property.
Understood.
And that's, I mean,
And that's who we,
And I
that's who
think
we adhere to as
lately,
well.
oftentimes, you have elections with, how many candidates?
One typically.
One for each seat?
Yeah, we'll
You know.
see. You actually have to get through caucuses that might have
Well,
more
that's
than
true.
one candidate.
That's
As I do.
So I hope this helps.
Okay, good.
If you have any questions, I'm here.
No, thanks. This is really thoughtful, and I appreciate it.
Thanks.
It's been good to kind of get,
I'd like to hear from Bruce.
yeah,
and
definitely. He's, well, this,
I may want to come back and say something.
yeah, of course, of course. And I don't, if, I don't want it to be a debate. This is a
Oh, no, of course
fact-finding
not.
message.
Of course not.
okay?
No, this is an exercise, and
It's my mic now.
Oh, wow. it's-
There we go.
good action. Go
Good
ahead.
evening. My name is Bruce Hill, for the record. This is the second time, as far as I can recall, in the past 20 years where I've been here without representing somebody else. And interestingly, the first time, as I recall, was in 2002 on the issue that was the catalyst for this municipal use zone. I wasn't here on April 11th, but I did review the Vimeo. And there were a number of references to various projects, a number of references to the history of the MU zone. And so I just wanted to try and fill in some of the perspective that I have, having dealt with this over time.
And did you basically write this?
I did, yeah.
Yes, okay.
Yeah. There was, first of all, the discussion really arose, I mean, on the 11th with the PowerPoint about the high school and how that was sort of the catalyst for this. And it was indeed, and in 2002 was when I actually proposed an outright exemption for public schools, and that was during the course of the appeal of the granting of the variance. There was a reference also to the Tokenique School. In 2004, I was chairman of the Tokenique School Building Committee, and it is true that we did not, I thought about it. I thought about using the municipal use zone for that project, but it wasn't necessary. And one reason I thought about it was because my opinion has been since the beginning of the MU zone, process, the thought process, was that I just think it's the right thing, particularly for school buildings. But it didn't happen in 2004. In 2006, I was a member of the board as well as the building committee of the new Darien Library. I will always call it the new Darien Library, even though it's not so new anymore. And I was zoning council, and that's when we actually, when I put, pen to paper and started working through what became the MU zone. In 2008, when the police department was being expanded and redeveloped, I was not technically part of the building committee, but Dwayne Lovello, then chief, asked me to step in, and I did act as zoning council to extend the municipal use zone to the police department. Then, of course, actually in 2008, I was zoning council for the Darien Housing Authority when we redid the Alan O'Neill homes. And at that time, I had a discussion with Jeremy in terms of what we're trying to achieve and whether the MU zone would be appropriate as a vehicle to achieve what we needed to do there. And I think it became very clear that because of the nature of that site and the design, the proposed design, the MU zone didn't really help that much, that really a modified DMR zone, multifamily use zone, was the best way to achieve what the Housing Authority needed on that site. So we didn't use it there. And then in 2016, I was zoning counsel again for the Darien Housing Authority for the old town hall homes. And let me start there and then work backward to give a little bit more color. As at least some of you will recall from that application, that almost didn't happen. We almost went off the rails with that application.
I'm sorry, I lost track. Which
With
application?
the Old Town
Old Town
Hall
Homes,
homes.
yeah.
And the reason for that was confusion over the MU zone. There were members of the commission, I think the majority, who had never encountered the MU zone. Probably never even had a reason to look at it in the regulations. There was a question raised by at least one member as to whether public housing was an appropriate use for the MU zone, even though it was in black and white in the preamble to the regulation. The attorney for the neighbors made the representation that perhaps the Darien Housing Authority was not an eligible use for the MU zone. My point is that there was a great deal of confusion, even though it had been passed in 2006, hadn't been used in a decade, and everybody kind of forgot about it. So even arriving here tonight, looking back through my notes, it's kind of a deja vu, Groundhog Day experience for me, because every time we have one of these proposals come along, every 3, 5, 10 years, it's like we're reinventing the wheel, because we don't have the institutional memory of what the MU zone was really supposed to be. And that, whatever happens in your deliberations, I hope that there's a way to fix that, so that there is a recognition of this. Now, I am the author of what became the MU zone. So if you love it, you're welcome. If you hate it, I'm sorry. I'm actually not really sorry, because I think it's a really useful tool. And the way it really evolved was in 2002. We say, oh, there was a variance and it was appealed, and it was a lot more complicated than that.
No, I mean, I think you saw, we called out that we almost didn't have a new high school built because of the lack of that.
But what's important, I
flexibility.
think, for the public to understand is that there's no more closely examined application in our town than a public school. It has to be blessed by virtually every department, every board in town. Starts with the ed specs from the Board of Education, has to go to the Board of Selectmen, has to go to the Board of Finance, has to go to the RTM, has to, of course, go to Planning and Zoning. We did all that with the high school. And then there were some folks who weren't happy about it, and so there was a referendum. You add another layer on that. For various reasons. People didn't like the price tag. Some tight-fisted Yankees, like members of my family even at that time. Some folks didn't want to vote for it because they didn't have a swimming pool. So it went to a referendum. It was overwhelmingly approved by a referendum, and then one neighbor decided to take an appeal of the variance that was required. I believe, my recollection was, the variance was for the building height because of the fly loft in the auditorium, which from that neighbor's house, you couldn't see any aspect of the building, much less the fly loft. And this whole process, tens of thousands of dollars, the time, and time is money for a municipality, just like a private business when you're trying to get a project done, was really thrown off by this appeal. So at that time, I came in to your predecessors and suggested an exemption for public schools. It was not that well received.
I mean, that's my point almost that I made to Mr. Maslin. It can go the opposite way, where you have a P&Z
Yeah.
commission that
Right.
and I'm not calling out this specific commission by any means, but
Right,
they could
and
have a
without-
more
yeah.
strict interpretation of the regs.
Correct, and without, really going back through all the ancient
Yeah.
history, at that time, as part of that, it wasn't just, walking in here saying you should exempt schools. What we did is we contacted every municipality, at least in Lower Fairfield County, that we could reach and get an answer from, and some outside of Fairfield County, and we had about 24 of them on a chart. How do you handle municipal applications, and how do you handle schools in particular? And on a continuum, there were the towns like Darien, like Greenwich, where you have to use the existing regs, the residential building height of 30 feet. Tough luck. Then there were, on the other opposite extreme, there were like New Canaan and Weston, where they were exempt. And I'm not speaking to existing regulations, this is 17 years ago, but they were exempt. And there are other municipalities where all municipal properties are exempt. Then in the middle, there were some that said, okay, you need greater building height, then you have to increase the setbacks. And that's more or less where we ultimately landed when I made the actual application for the MU zone.
And for the library, is that correct?
Yeah.
For the
well,
library.
Well, what's important to note, and I don't have very many disagreements with what Bob said, it's more emphasis. And the MU zone was not created for the library. The MU zone came out of the 2002 debacle over the high school. And in fact, as I was working through the MU zone, which I was calling a civic use zone, so it was changed. Even at that time, I expressed my opinion that it should be at least extended to the Darien Police Department. This was before there was any thoughts of expanding that, and that we really should take a look at other municipal properties and just do it. One other property in particular that I recall feeling we should just apply the MU zone was the old library, once that was sold to the town of Darien, because I felt that it was appropriate at that location to give greater flexibility. At that time, I wasn't involved in the whole shuffle thing, and I didn't care about that. It just seemed to be the right way to provide flexibility, again, for precious town assets that we are in short supply of. So it wasn't just the library that drove this. The idea of the MU zone, what became the MU zone, it was originally intended as a floating zone. Now, the question is, what's the distinction between a floating zone and an overlay zone? And there's a lot of overlap. A floating zone is not defined by statute. Okay, different municipalities have different definitions. But in general, it is a zone that's created without a particular geographic location, and in many municipalities, there is essentially identified list of sites where it would be appropriate for that use. I think Stonington is one that I read about recently. They actually have a master plan. You make a master plan where the floating zone will land, and that's typically for mixed-use redevelopment. It's not necessarily for schools. But the intent was, and I pulled out, my old application.
Brought back memories, I'm sure.
I was shaking my head because I couldn't believe it was 17 years ago when this whole thing started. But clearly, in the application, I did call out, well, in fact, I did a memo about the civic use zone and floating zone dated October 21st, 2005. I think I may have even submitted this again in the Old Town Hall Homes. But it's in the file for the Darien Library from 2005. And in it, I quoted a Supreme Court case which actually says that a floating zone is a good idea because it provides more control over changes than does the granting of special exceptions, which is often another term for special permit, with no greater likelihood of incompatible uses. the bottom line is, I don't think it matters a whole lot whether you call it a floating zone or an overlay zone. What does matter, in my mind, what does matter is throwing up an additional hurdle for the proposed development of a public use. And because of the old town hall homes.
I gotta stop you there, because Steve and I sat on it, and I agree, the attorney for the neighbors brought up some questions. But when, I might have even been the commissioner that asked about whether or not it
You were not.
applies. But remember, we're also trying to make a record, so I don't remember it as so, I thought it was a no-brainer that it was gonna go MU, but maybe my.
I do too.
Yeah, but again,
That
we're the
doesn't-
ones putting forth that it would be
Yeah.
applied on all municipalities, right?
That doesn't
So,
matter, but.
yeah. I understand
My
that, yeah,
recollection
yeah.
is different.
There was some
And we
question.
had to bring Peter Bigelow in to say, yeah, we
Yeah.
intended public housing, even though it's there in black and
Yeah.
white. There was a particular member who
Yeah.
questioned whether the Darien Housing Authority was a private
Yeah.
entity.
Yeah.
I don't want to revisit
Yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
My
Okay.
point is.
Because that went, listen, I mean, bottom line, just for the record,
Yeah.
that approval, I think I'm proud of that approval, participating in that, how we worked with the neighbors, and the MU gave us the flexibility on the height to do that, so.
Well,
yeah.
I am as well, and I think that that's a better example of the use of the MU zone, even than the library or the police department. I agree with Bob, they're relatively isolated parcels. But what happened there, and I think it's important for the neighbors and for the public to understand, is that the MU zone itself didn't really give us that much. It's still where and it was a little contentious in my view, but it was contentious about issues that are always contentious. Parking, traffic circulation,
Views from
drainage,
windows.
views. Those are the issues that are always hammered out appropriately in the special permit process and site plan review. And that will always be the case, whether it's an MU zone or a residential zone or a business zone. And I think it's important for the public to have confidence, and the neighbors have confidence that that's going to happen.
One of the issues that came up, you probably saw, is Tokenique, given its topography
Right.
and in the area, and how the original school laid out and the new school laid out, there didn't need to be a special permit hearing for that. Is that correct? Because it fit within the residential zone envelope.
Right, we had to go to EPC, and, because it's.
But there was no special permit.
No,
Public hearing.
as I said, I
Yeah,
thought about
yeah.
whether we should have
Yeah.
the MU zone land there, just because as long as we're involved in redoing that parcel, again, my feeling is that we should use it more often rather than less.
Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
In your opinion, do you think it should be a floating zone or an overlay zone?
Again, as I was saying, I don't really care. I think it should be applied to the schools.
Correct.
I think it should be applied to the properties list, whatever you want to call it. The problem with what Bob is proposing is it leaves in place this extra hurdle,
And what's that? What do you mean?
which is to have a separate approval.
Yeah, okay.
Whatever you want to call it, I think you should approve the MU zone, place it on these parcels now, because it's very confusing. It's confusing for the commissioners, it's really confusing for the public and the neighbors, where we're debating whether it should be this zone, and then if it is this zone, then there's a special permit, and what are the setbacks? And I think that's unnecessary. I mean, the fundamental driving force for me in this whole effort over the years is we have a process for deciding how we're going to use municipal properties and quasi-municipal properties. And if we go through all the appropriate approvals in terms of getting a decision about how we should use a property, and if we get the funding approvals, and everybody, and the body politic in Darien agrees we should do this, with all due respect to the neighbors, I don't think one or two or three neighbors should have an undue impact on that project. Because yes, maybe there will be a change in the zone, and you'll get a big school next to your property. But maybe the neighbor will move a year later and will have had an impact on a school structure that's going to be there 50, 75 years and serve thousands of people. So
All
there's
right.
got to be a
You're
balance.
getting into the philosophy of kind of land use law, and I appreciate that, but let's try to just, if you wouldn't mind, just focusing on this.
Well, I'm here, I'm happy to answer
appreciate
your
the
questions.
comments.
I do feel that these properties should be rezoned for MU. I don't think we should reinvent the wheel every time there's an application.
Okay.
Can I ask you?
Sure.
With regards to once a building committee or once a site gets designated for development, and we've been talking about Old Town Homes before they even put a shovel in the ground, probably
Right.
for 5 or 10 years. You know, they've been talking about doing over the schools, either Oxbridge or Hindley or Royal, since I've lived in town for 20 years. Right? But
Right.
as soon as the Board of Education, whoever the party goes, the first step, you know, then they can come in and change it to an MU zone. Is the way I would look at it.
Currently, yeah. They haven't, though.
They haven't,
Yeah,
which is, I
is
mean, I've
amazing
seen
to me.
plans and they've already cited it and they've already
Well,
moved it.
The
I don't
the problem with that, Steve, is that you come in and say, oh, we want to change Oxbridge to an MU zone. What are the neighbors going to ask? Why? What are you going to build there? It's a chicken and egg thing.
Yeah, yeah.
You can't just come in and say, we want a zone change.
But the
And-
plans are already out there now.
No,
Right.
no. They're just, there's a member of the committee for here, they just hired an architect.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
that's the problem.
For renderings,
Oh,
I
I
think.
thought the school goes here, the school goes there.
Well, you're thinking common sense, but that's not, right? The status
Right.
update, yeah,
The
sorry.
building committee just hired an architect within the past couple weeks. And although there's been sketches and informal things, at this point, the architect just got on board. I've not even met with the new architect, sit down, and I
There's
think the
nothing.
committee's expecting over the next couple weeks for the architect to give them more details. And as you've acknowledged, the question is, does the architect, if the architect were to come here tomorrow, the logical question from both the commission and the public would be, well, you're coming to change either the height or the setbacks or the coverage, what do you think you might need? So I think that becomes.
It's the chicken and the egg situation, so.
Is, you would, I think a lot of people would say, well, what do you have in mind? And of course, they can't draw what they have. So it's kind of, we've already started talking even months ago about what are the applicable setbacks for this property. And we said currently it's in an R2 zone and it's a rear lot, so these are the setbacks. However, if the MU zone is applied, these are the setbacks, and you get height and coverage. So the architect, I believe, that has been hired is aware of this situation.
But they need some sort of certainty. It can't
Yeah.
be, oh, well, we'll go and apply for the MU zone, and then you can figure it out.
Yeah, and then, we're just using this as an example, I really don't want to go down the pipe of,
Right.
defining Ox Ridge. And full disclosure, the debacle I went through in the lights, helping the DGFL as a volunteer, kind of sparked my request that Glenn look at this and applying it to all municipal properties. So I am that was the catalyst for us looking at it. Now, I'm not predetermining that this commission is going to sign on to the idea, and that's why we're having these discussions. I think there's pros and cons, and that we have to weigh in deliberations. I mean, you gave some really compelling arguments. Mr. Maslin did, the neighbors did, I don't want to call the neighbors, the public that stepped forward last time. So I think, this is, as I always say, the legislative action of this commission is where we, this is why we get paid the big bucks. This is actually the interesting stuff, though. This is where we act as legislators. I really, I appreciate your comments. I appreciate the public's comments, or we, I should say. And I don't know if you had anything else to say.
The only thing, and the only
I
thing
think
would
I
really
actually looked out to you when I was working with the DGFL, and whether or not we should kind of look at that avenue, actually, so.
The only thing I would slightly take issue with Bob is, and I think it's important for the public to understand, whether you have the MU zone land on these properties or not, nobody's going to come sneaking in here with an application, throw it on your desk and say, here's what we're going to build. That's not the way it works in the private sector. Bob and I would never do that. we would have informal meetings. We'd have meetings with staff, informal meetings perhaps with a commissioner or two. We'd come in here for informal meetings. We'd go to ARB informally, and you can multiply that by 10 times when it's a public project. Okay, so it would shock me if the building committee and well-experienced building committee that we have for Oxbridge would not follow that route. And also in the mix of that, in projects I've been involved with, has been discussions with neighbors. So no one's going to come in here because it's an MU zone and try and slip something in
Throw an
that
8-foot
nobody's
setback.
aware of. That's
I
not
understand
gonna
that. All right.
happen. And that's all I
I want to move this along, if that's okay.
Absolutely.
Mr. Mazzolini, anybody else have comments? No? Or Mr. Mazzolini does? Again, we're not debating, we're absorbing.
Yeah, I'm Michael Alfieri, 383
Could
Mansfield
you spell your
Avenue.
last name, please?
Alfieri.
Thank you.
And I just want to step to the podium for a moment to just reemphasize, I'm on the building committee. I think I introduced myself to all of you. And to Jeremy's point, the building committee has not made any site plans.
Yeah, we understand.
Building plans. I mean, I just wanted to.
We just
go on
hired an
record.
architect, as I
And
understand.
we haven't hired them. We actually selected the
Ah,
architect.
okay.
We haven't even
Got
contracted
it.
with them. And as of tonight, a meeting was going on until 9 o'clock that I wasn't there for, to select the construction manager.
Great.
So that's where we are in the process. I mean, I think that needs to be on record.
Yeah.
And, everything in terms of, ascertaining those details is ahead of us. So I just want to put that up.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you. Why don't you go before Mr. Maslin, sir? Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Very quickly, the name is Francisco, and the last name is R-I-V as Victor, E-R-O, Rivero.
Thank you.
So, to me, there are 2 points here. One, as we said last time, this MU is a big package, right? It's 13 properties. So they have different colors and different sizes. The one we refer to is Oxbridge Elementary. That is a back lot surrounded by houses. That is totally different to discuss the library that has the police station behind and
We
Boston
understand.
Post in front.
Yep.
Very different. So I have nothing against the MU. Only that to apply the MU to an elementary school, not a high school,
Yeah, now you're arguing.
in a residential area, very, very different.
Okay, yeah.
So my point is, I wouldn't include some of the properties because the change is dramatic, right? From 8 to 50 or maybe 100, I don't know, feet in the distance. So that's one to me. The second one is, I know there is no plan of Oxbridge, and they just hired the architect. But I live different realities. I come here and I hear that there is no plan. But I live right next to Oxbridge, and everybody there mentions there is a plan, and the idea is to move the school to this other side of the land.
Well, that's.
So my only point,
It's common sense.
my only
if
point,
you want to operate a school while
that's
you're
the thing.
building one,
But that is exactly the point. You hire an architect. Only takes for the architect to hear from one of you guys or from the principal of the school or something that, well, look at, the idea is to put the school over there. Then he starts to work with that.
Oh,
go
you don't even have to
with that
start
project,
there.
right?
You don't have to start there. You can say, we want to operate a school while we construct the school. And then you look around the property.
Yeah.
That's the reality, I think. That's we don't
For me-
have a 15-acre site there, right?
Yeah,
Or-
but for me, as we quickly said last time, it's an L shape.
I get it. I'm not.
And in front is 30% bigger where it is today. So there are many ways to build the new school around, the one today.
They're going to look at all that, right? The one criteria, as I've heard it, correct me if I'm wrong, is they want to operate a school while they build a school. That's the only criteria, and then any layman goes up there and looks around where there's a lot of room. I'm not saying that's where they're going to choose, but that's where the ideas come from.
I just hope, that this architect or whoever else starts from zero,
Yeah.
with no info biases.
Except for that, they're gonna have that instruction.
Well, it's part of the ed specs.
Right, I mean.
That instruction, no?
The
Sorry?
education specs brought forth by the Board of Ed was that they will not cease operations during the construction of the new facility. Okay, so that was put forth by the Board of Education. I'm not sure of the processes, but the building committee basically adopted those ed specs. I don't want to speak out of turn, and we're getting into the weeds here on one property, but just understand that reality, and that's what I want to leave it at.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Is that close, Mr. Alf?
Let me come up one more time.
I knew I'd get sucked into the
And I
vortex of Oxridge.
I don't necessarily want to speak on behalf of the building committee, but I want to make sure it's represented properly. One of the criteria that we are abiding by is to keep the school operating during the period of construction. But to the point, it doesn't necessarily mean operating as it is today. There are different
Okay, I
ways of
understand.
phasing it, moving the early learning program, moving certain classrooms,
Yeah.
doing the public, capacities of the
Understood.
school separate from the academics. So and we need to develop a phasing strategy to accomplish that.
Understood.
In the end, portions of the new school may be where the existing school is.
Understood. Thanks. All right, Mr. Maslin,
I'll be quick.
if you could be quick, that'd be awesome.
I'll be very quick. And I'll keep my comments to, as not a debate with Bruce, because I agree with almost everything he said. The history is very helpful. He was involved in some of these applications. I wasn't involved in any of them. But there's a couple of things that jump out at me. One is, based on the sequence of, and the treatment of each of these projects that he mentioned, they truly were handled on a case-by-case basis. Some needed,
Understood.
some didn't need the MU zone. The one thing that,
There hasn't been one denied. It just, we haven't applied.
I got it, I
I'm just setting the
understand,
record
I understand.
straight.
And what's really, I think, scary, I can't think of a better word, to some neighbors, especially in the Oxridge School neighborhood, is if you take the MU zone regulations as they're written today, you can wind up with a 3-story building 8 feet from a property line. That's in the regs, and the standard is special permit standard, not a commission's decision whether the zone should land
I
on
get it.
that site. That's a big difference, because when you're applying a floating zone, you're making a legislative decision that is much easier to support in an appeal than a denial where you have potentially 8-foot setbacks and you allow them to go to 15, and it's less than the 100 feet. Special permit law is not as discretionary as sometimes people think.
No, we have to meet standards.
You have to
10
meet
at
standards,
least.
but when you have setbacks that relate to building height, the court starts out with an assumption or a presumption that that setback is a good setback. And when you see things like adequately screened and things like that, sure, the court takes that into consideration to some extent. But the fact that you have a setback coupled with a building height tells the court that you've already made a decision in the regulations that that is appropriate. It's just like a subdivision in an area where you have minimum lot sizes. You can't deny a subdivision because it's going to generate too much traffic, right? Certain things are implied in the regulations as they stand. So what's scary is the 8 feet. If you had, if you're able to clarify some of these setbacks the way they're written now, so that you have minimums and they relate to the zone that these properties are in, and you can look at the individual sites on a case-by-case basis, as happened in the past, you can make a much better decision. And if you get in on the ground floor by recommending and encouraging applicants to come in informally and get your feedback, I think you know, it seems like the process has been talk to Jeremy, but never really get to the full commission until there's a formal application filed.
I mean, there's always informal comments before pre-application.
But how many times has that happened? Did it happen before the high school? I don't
Oh,
know.
no.
Did it
No, I'm
happen-
talking now, you know, the chair will discuss with staff what the applicant should or shouldn't do before the application is filed.
Well, it's none of it's binding, it's nothing in the
No,
regulations.
I'm just saying there's guidance from the commission prior, yeah. That's what I'm getting at.
But put it in the preamble, so
Okay,
it's
got it.
there in
Yeah, I'm
black
not
and
arguing
white,
with
so
you.
somebody can read it and say, yes.
You want to formalize it,
This
yeah.
is something we should do.
I'm just saying it's a practice that's occurred for
Okay.
commissions and
Sure.
commissions over the past. so.
Sure. So I think you want me to sit down, so I think I've said just.
As long as you're complete, yeah, that'd be great.
Sorry, yeah.
So as long as you're
And
done.
you now have the markup, and you have my comments in the record.
Anybody else? Okay, seeing none, could I get a motion to close the public hearings on the two items this evening?
Motion to close.
Second.
All in favor? And again, thank you, everybody, for your input. It's been helpful in this. All right, and we'll deliberate maybe in 2 weeks?
Maybe the 28th, as soon
Okay.
as the 28th.
Okay, general meeting now. Site plan application number 304, landfilling and regrading application number 450, Town of Darien, Diller property, Nutmeg Lane. I'm going to open up this second one because they're related. Site plan application number 273E, flood damage prevention application number 354A, landfilling and regrading application number 53F, Town of Darien, Darien High School, 80 High School Lane. So these are deliberations. Jeremy, you want to?
Sure, you may recall that the plan here is a cross-country path which goes around the perimeter, basically, of the Darien High School property, extends onto the 5-acre Diller property, which is to the west of the high school property. The Diller property also includes a 5-foot wide boardwalk. Both aspects, or let's rephrase that. The high school portion has been approved by the EPC. You did get a report from the EPC on the Diller portion. And you heard during the public hearing comments from neighbors about a number of issues, some related to the flood-related issues. Joe Canis presented, Joe.
On Diller mostly.
On the Diller. Joe's a professional engineer, talked about the regrading and potential impacts. Actually, the flooding, the portion of the high school property is in the flood zone.
Right.
The Diller property is
Okay. The wetlands
wetter,
impact.
but not
yeah.
in the flood zone.
Okay.
And there was talk about the grading and the activity and other issues.
Okay, so the two issues that I remember, did you want to say something?
I was just gonna, and the two or three trees that are coming out.
There were two trees in the high school property by that street, I'll call it the lamppost in the northwest corner, somewhat close to Mr. Miller's property, two evergreens coming down.
Okay. And that's to avoid Mr. Miller's property, is that
The
correct?
path was revised during the public hearing process to avoid Mr. Miller's property.
Okay. So the two issues came back, whether or not there's setbacks for a path. And the answer on both properties is no.
Correct.
You know, so, I don't know, and then the second issue was just the type of materials that would be used on the high school in some of its regrading. I think, you know, it's probably safe to say much of the Diller is going to be crushed stone and or some sort of wood material, like a boardwalk, if you will, but it's not a typical boardwalk. It's laid in the ground as slats, so
Correct.
water can flow in between the slats and not impact the wetlands.
Just to clarify that, though, that slatted wooden material is for parkland use, not for the track use.
Yes, there is a
For the walking
portion,
path.
correct,
The athletes, be that as it may, the student athletes are not running
on the
that-
wood.
on the
They
wood.
will be running on grass on part of the town, high school property. Part of it's on turf, the AstroTurf. Part of it will be on crushed stone. So there's a variety of different textures, if you will. materials.
And the wooden, or the plastic wooden plank boardwalk was required specifically by the Parks and Rec Commission.
Yeah, I think it was requested to complete the loop on the Diller property during the hours that the high school is not accessible. to.
It's just
Yeah,
what they wanted.
yeah. Well, no, it was to actually complete a loop. So you didn't have to exit on High School Lane and walk on the roadway. So if you watch the kind of planning and the hearings in the EPC, where they discuss it, I don't know if we covered it, but it is to complete the loop so people can go, and it's a 5-acre property, walk that loop without hopping back out onto the road by High School Lane. So it goes along the, what is that, drainage?
Yeah, drainage ditch.
Culvert,
stream, Yep.
along the culvert that was created for the high school.
My point is, it was a Parks and Rec.
Yeah.
That was not a-
And then other issues such as parking, garbage, screening, headlights came up for the high school property, but really, and I think I was so direct with the Board of Ed because I gave the chair 5 weeks' notice that some of those complaints, which were unrelated to any land use issues, were being brought up by the neighbors, and the neighbor specifically said that no one had contacted him regarding that. So sorry if I came off as direct, but you asked me for the background. And so that was the background of my frustration, that no one had reached out to the neighbor on those issues that had nothing to do with this land use board. Hopefully they have reached out to him. So I guess I'll open it up to anybody. Go.
I have two
Go
questions. The first of which I can't remember.
We'll come back to number one.
The one question was, there was some discussion about where the property line is.
Yes.
And I don't remember, I seem to have a sense that we agreed that somebody was going to engage somebody to figure that out, but who was it?
Okay, so Mr. Miller, if I remember correctly, Mr. Miller's, during construction, the question was raised whether or not the property would be staked so that there would be no encroachment on his property. And the answer was, yes, they would stake it for construction.
In
Now,
just Mr. Miller's area.
Correct. That's, as I
They
remember
may
it.
stake it in other areas
Yeah.
too, but I would put in the resolution, I don't mean to cut you off, Jim, go ahead.
no, well, I mean, we went out there, we walked the property, and
I'm sorry, which property? So we're,
the Diller property.
Diller, okay.
And I don't know Miller from Jones, I mean, so I don't know who I'm talking about.
Oh, so
but-
Miller is Darien High School, okay.
Okay,
Yeah.
I mean, but
So I want to make sure we're on the same properties. So let's focus on the Diller first.
on the
if
Diller
that's all right.
property, there, as a layman, one or two of the residences along one side
Yeah.
of the property seem to be encroaching on the Diller property.
Correct.
Seem to,
Correct.
as a layman. I
Yes.
look-
Correct. As
It's on the survey.
Is there any, I mean, it's already on the survey, we already know this.
Yeah.
Right.
There's actually pins by the rock wall of one of those
Right.
properties that shows the property marking.
Right, what's helpful on the survey that they submitted, it shows the stone walls,
Yeah.
which makes it very easy for the town to ascertain where the boundary is. And I think you're right, Jim, that after this process, I think there will be more hands-on by the Park and Rec Commission, which through the years has not really, I'll call it, actively maintained it. I think they're going to take a more active role, and as part of this construction, if it gets approved and through the system, that they're going to have to continue to monitor better any encroachments. Whether that is-
From the neighbors to the property,
Anybody.
or vice versa.
Also, yes,
I mean, I have a rock wall in the back of my house, if I wanna make it into stone, into concrete, make it not physical, I gotta get a building permit, right?
it depends, or if you want to put a structure there or something like that.
Right, yeah.
But I think it gets to, I think, Jim, what we talked about was things like leaves and brush and other debris maybe.
Well, that too, I mean, it's a dumping ground for a number of the abutters to the property. I remember my first
Okay.
question.
But can I go back just to the Miller thing? Oh, don't forget. Well, I just want to make sure I cover, everything's going to be staked as it's constructed where it's near property lines. That we can put that in the resolution.
Everything or Miller?
Can we put no, I want to put something, anything that is close to a property line that at least they mark where the property lines are so they ensure that they don't encroach the paths onto the neighbor's
Within
property.
10 feet?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
I agree.
right, 'cause
I
that-
agree.
If you make it every property.
No, yeah, I'm
line,
sorry, yeah. Yeah.
Then you
So,
get it- then you
so in
have
an area where
leads.
they think they're within 10 feet, it
Yes.
should be staked.
Yes.
That's a great idea.
Yes.
Okay, sorry, Jim, go ahead.
The other question, there was some discussion about parking, and neighbors commented about it, but I read that the police have already approved that, and so it's moot as far as we're concerned.
Correct, so there's no regulation for, I'll let Jeremy
Right,
talk about
as
the
John was
parking.
saying, is when you talk about a public park, there's no specific provision in the regs for how much parking should there be in a public park, nor is there a provision for a high school. There's no specific. So the commission can say, as part of their decision, what they think would be appropriate in terms of if there needs to be, for example, on the high school property, you're not gonna make them, it didn't sound like you're gonna say, please add 17 spaces to account for a cross-country meet, which will occur once a year. So
No,
the
but
commission can say, under section 904, there's no requirement to add parking here, and the commission could say, and we find no extra parking is necessary. And on Diller, you can look through the regs and say, there's no provision specifically for public parks. If you think of Woodland Park or Stony Brook Park, which are somewhat comparable in terms of
Yeah.
activity, and Woodland, it might have 6 or 8, 10 spaces,
4,
maybe 10.
They're not straight.
they're
They're
not.
certainly not
it's-
striped, and you might
kinda-
be wiggling
yeah.
between some
Alex
trees.
Wood's got 0.
Alex
They have a
Woods has
few designated, but
very
3,
few,
yeah.
yeah.
They're not on their property.
Okay, so as far as the comments from the neighbors
So you're talking about the safety comment?
about
Right.
where the parking sign's gonna be and where the, we don't
It's
have
all
to-
police commission, yeah.
That's not
Yeah.
our, okay.
And just
I
for
wanna be sure
background,
we're
I,
responsive to
yeah,
the-
yeah, yeah, and for background, I requested that the police commission weigh in whether or not they, approved of parking, because they would have to sign off on it. And, DPW will build it, and they'll build it to the town's specifications for parallel parking.
Right,
And that's-
and we have
If
the
we were
letter
to
from
approve this.
Captain Anderson in the record.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And if there are changes in the future, they might try one thing, and they might change it down the road, but that would be their jurisdiction.
Right.
On enforcement or hours or whatever.
And again, that's kind of the background. I wanted to keep our jurisdiction, which literally was minor regrading and construction within a flood zone at the high school only, under our purview. If you watch the EPC hearings, which went on for 3 different hearings, they talked about a lot of different things, which were not wetlands related. So that's why I tried to keep it really focused. And just because it's a topic out there, the reason why Highland Farm needs parking is it's not a dedicated parkland. And that's a very important point, which is going to come up because that discussion was postponed last night amongst the RTM. So just, if anybody's watching, much different type property, much different regulations. Off topic, so I will
Can I-
open it up to anybody.
Sure, go first.
Do you want anything to say?
I think the staking, that was my biggest,
Okay.
if it's within 10 feet, I think that's super important. Everything else seemed okay.
Cool, thanks.
The only thing I want to add relative to parking, the police commission can put parking wherever they want to.
Yes,
They can do, they said they need parking in front of a building, they can put parking there.
right, the on-street
Yeah.
parking, and we see it all the time. It comes and goes, or different signage goes up, 1 hour to 2 hour, or some on the post road recently has been added or eliminated.
Or Old Kings Highway
Old Kings
North,
Highway is a good
we've been
example.
working as a commission to, this is years prior, but we've been working as a commission to kind of suggest, hey, we're trying to get more parking downtown, and this is a great underutilized roadway that would have room. And they moved, actually, the line a couple of years ago and that sort of thing.
There's an overpass bridge, I think, on.
Yeah.
what's it,
Hollow Tree
Hollow Tree
Ridge,
Ridge Road.
that somebody's interested in seeing commuter parking on, but
But they can put parking wherever they want to, we have no jurisdiction, they can take it
Correct.
away. Okay.
okay, so do you have enough,
Yep, Fred and I will have
information?
something drafted for May 28th.
And would you mind just providing a memo to various town bodies, Board of Selectmen, Board of
Ed.
Selectmen, Board of Ed, and Parks and Rec, just with a quick update of how what you've just been instructed, just because there's a parallel approval process going on. I think we'll, just like EPC, if we keep them up to speed, and we
Sure.
will make final deliberations decision on,
We'll aim for the 28th,
Yeah.
2 weeks from tonight.
Can I ask one question when you round up? The 10 feet we're talking about, I think that's important, but if you could just eyeball how many properties we're talking about,
Yes, as part of that, we'll try to figure it
I got
out.
my property staked and it costs $1,000. If they have to stake, 20 properties, that's a lot of money.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think it is. In fact,
That's what I'm just
Yeah.
asking.
yeah, it's a good
It's
question.
free.
Well, Fred and I will take the
You
scale
have
out.
some on Holly Lane side.
I think what was interesting is when we measured relative to Mr. Miller's property, originally we thought it was 8 feet, and it ended up being 20 or 22.
Correct.
Oh, wow, okay. So, yeah, that'd be great if for
Make
our
a
final
determination.
deliberations, just,
Which ones?
yeah, which eyeball it, like, don't spend 3 hours.
No, because we can reduce the 8 down to, if you reduce the 10
Could be one or
down to
two
8,
specific areas.
you might drop out.
Okay, so then, oh, wow, where are we? Oh, so we're at the aquarium. Proposed amendments to Darien zoning regulations, 4-2019, site plan application number 305, special permit application number 306, flood damage prevention application number 393, Aquarium Water Company, 31 Dove Drive. Anybody want to start off? Any comments or?
We have 2 draft resolutions. Fred separated them out.
Yeah.
The straightforward regulation request,
Yeah,
which is to change one number in the regulations from 300 to 750. So that's called out in the 3-page resolution. We have an effective date of Sunday, May 26th.
So that's, the numbers are actually kind of backwards, right? That's.
The regulation,
That's, it's 4-2019.
that's correct, 4-2019.
okay, so you want to just, anybody have comments on that, other than looks great?
I do not.
Okay, so, I agree, it looks great. So can I get a motion to approve as submitted?
Motion to approve is submitted.
Second?
All in favor?
4-0.
Great. Okay, then we'll talk about the site plan application, special permit application, and flood damage prevention application.
Right, this is, certainly covers all the topics which were discussed at the public hearing by Mr. Berlandi. The fact that, the nature of what they do there, the fact that they're going to have 2 buildings that will be one new building, and things will be elevated within the building, the purpose of the building. They have to change the way it's designed to meet certain environmental regulations. So the commission, as part of this draft resolution, has required an as-built map and an elevation certificate because the work is in the flood zone. As they've acknowledged, the work will be going on and off for about a year. And there were some neighbors, you remember the gentleman who was here at the public hearing had some comments, and it was ironic that he was able to catch a very tiny error in the elevations.
So awesome.
That was great.
Fantastic.
That was great.
And I hope we got everything on the record, and it was Americana at its best right there,
Yep.
and public hearing at its best, so.
And he seemed to be satisfied with the answers that he got to
Yes,
his
he had
various
some, asked some
questions.
great questions.
We did.
And one of the, if you could compliment Aquarian on this, is how they designed it when you look at kind of the visual impact of that, because it's basically that house that it's impacting.
Yep.
It's actually reducing the horizon, well, they're the main house, but yes, 2 houses. But the visual horizon, if you will, is now reduced almost in half. Now, it goes back deeper, but it's
No
going to
one will
have
ever see
less visual
And
impact.
I
so.
think Fred put in here, relative to that in finding number 3 is because of the nature of where it is and how it's designed, that we didn't feel a need to bring it by the Architecture Review Board because it's tucked away in the woods, and you're only going to see the one facade, and it's only, I think, one person, maybe 2 in town that will see that facade. So other than that, straightforward resolution, and this will take effect soon after the zoning regulation takes effect on Sunday, May 26th.
Okay, so let's just put a formal vote on this one.
I move the resolution be adopted as drafted.
Yep.
Second.
Steve O'Vanny,
All,
4-0, as written.
you can do the minutes. Do we have any minutes? I forgot if we had minutes or not.
No minutes.
No minutes, shoot, I'm sorry. Okay, these are going to go quickly, I promise. Discussion of multifamily housing.
Right. Let's pass this out.
So I guess I'll kick it off.
Yeah,
and
why
then
don't
if
you handle it?
Yeah, you did. Oh, yeah, I'm sorry, that's right. Shoot. We'll go very quickly, actually. So, just as an FYI, based on some of the commentary coming through some of the school regionalization hearings and some published items, I asked staff over the last couple months to start thinking about compiling a inventory, if you will, of multi-family housing units. Cut two ways, and this is a work in progress, so if you can kind of mull this over and think about how we can better create this report. But it's basically an inventory of multi-dwelling housing constructed and approved since 2000. And then anything on the second page, basically pre-2000. And then I think when we say other family dwelling units, there's some things like housing of employees on site, assisting living, memory care, some, I don't want to say random, but housing above stores, some duplexes, some things that don't fit quite into the definition of apartments or condominiums. And, this summary, although these aren't finalized numbers, is pretty stunning. If you look at the first page, since 2000, this town has constructed 473, based on these preliminary numbers, multi-dwelling units. Market rate units are 291, and the number of affordable units are 176. So I forgot to put the percentages there, but what's been constructed, if you go 476, I'm sorry, no, it's wrong, right? It's 176 divided by 473, 37% of multi-dwelling units have been deed restricted affordable since 2000. And that doesn't include the approved not yet constructed, which of course has the three main projects, but a few projects like 4 Pheasant Run, 57 Hoyt Street, and I should say 4 major projects, Old Town Hall Homes. So when you add those, approved and constructed or approved, since 2000, this town's added 833, 557 have been market rate, and 270 have been affordable, and so that's about 33%, which is, in my mind, pretty remarkable, especially when you start to look at some of the numbers that predate 2000. And again, we got to refine this because this overstates some of the units, but there were nowhere near as many units pre-2000. So over the last 20 years, this town's gone, has on a multi-family dwelling unit and affordable has made strides. So what I ask is you kind of look at this, think about it. I think Jamie's been, First Selectman Stevenson has been very interested in this document, and I think there might be a point in which we might publicize, the strides that Darien's made on the multi-dwelling front. And so we're going to refine it, work with staff, but if you have any ideas, throw Jeremy and Fred those ideas and help us kind of create this document, because I think it's, again, when I saw the numbers, when they sent it to me last week and kind of reflected on them this weekend and today, I was pretty floored. And we assume maybe 7,000 to 7,200 total dwelling units in the town of Darien. So we still have some wood to chop in terms of like catching up with like a Norwalk or a Stanford. And I don't think we ever could, just given the demographics and the geography and the lack of open space. But I think it's pretty interesting. So
Remember, we had like a town-by-town comparison?
yeah,
That would be cool just to
Yeah.
revisit that as well, because
that's in
this
the
is pretty,
yeah.
I think
That's in the town plan.
I think it's in
Yeah.
the town plan.
Now, the problem with the town plan is it's based on 2010 census numbers, right?
Right, the 2020 census numbers come out in about 2.5 years from now.
Yeah, so we're kind of,
yeah. Okay.
these are much more updated on
Yeah, this is
account,
amazing.
but, so 2020, this will be really interesting to kind of then compare and contrast. I mean, listen, Stanford's multi-dwelling units is going to skyrocket from 2010, just looking at what's happening in the south end and stuff. But anyway, interesting, think about it, share the idea and concept with others, and we'll refine this
Let
document.
me just
Yeah.
make two quick comments relative and questions. The type of dwelling, that's supposed to be an apartment or condominium, is that what we're
Yeah,
saying?
basically, or, in the case of,
I'm just trying to get rid of
like
columns.
Corbin is mixed because,
I'm just trying to get rid of columns where it says rental or occupied. An apartment's typically a rental and a condominium's typically ownership.
oh, I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's the difference. If you
Okay.
call it type of dwelling, call it,
Apartment or condo.
make it apartment or condo or a rental apartment or condo. The second one down, be what?
Hold on, I lost you. So,
This is repetitive. This column and this column.
Steve saying,
so apartments always rental? Is that, okay,
Yes.
thank you. I just learned something.
Real estate inside.
Man, it's
And then-
amazing.
And then the second one down, Bay Water Property, is that Academy Street?
which one?
Second one down after,
1014 to 1020
That's
plus.
1020 Post, there's 6 units on the upper floors
Those are
that
apartments.
David's renting them out,
Those are apartments. I'll give this to you too. Where is, whatchamacallit
that's-
house?
Academy Street isn't even on here, so yeah, we got
You're
it.
missing Academy Street,
Yep,
So
which
there
is
we go.
called Mead House.
Yeah.
the Mead House.
MEAD.
We sure that's not on the back page somewhere?
Nope, I totally forgot.
Mead House is, I mean, that's all rentals, but remember, we got cash for that. You got money.
For the affordable
Yeah.
housing, yeah.
So that's even more,
Yeah, yeah.
because they got, what, 1.2 units or something like that?
Well, we parlayed that into Old Town Hall Home, so.
But you're still at the, that's the cash. You're
Yeah,
still
no,
at-
what I'm saying is that cash was used to create a 1 or 2 units at Old Town
I
Hall
would still
Homes, right?
count it.
What?
I'd still count those two. You're
wait,
saying,
wait.
you're saying you're double counting?
If you're, since the cash was used on another affordable housing project, there's no more cash anymore. It
Right,
was
right.
transferred, so if it was sitting there as cash and not applied to the new project, I would,
You would go with 2 more?
or whatever the number was, 1.5 more. But at this point, the cash has been, I don't know if it's been quite appropriated, but it's been approved for appropriation for,
I would have counted the 2 more, but you don't want, it doesn't matter, it's either front, okay. God, this is awesome.
so, yeah, think about how we can, especially, you guys in real estate, how we can kind of refine this. But it was just an idea based on a lot of the rhetoric we've heard,
37% affordable housing, that just seems,
that
off
we've
the
added,
charts.
that
Seems
we've
like- yeah.
added. The incremental housing since 2000, based on these preliminary numbers, is somewhere in the 35% range. It's just,
I would someday certify this and
yeah.
How many more we got to go?
that's on the ball.
Well,
400.
that's this section right here, right? So,
94
What's this page?
and that's before 2000, a couple projects that we have to figure out where to throw in. So, I think what we're ultimately going to do is just combine these 2 lists and then kind of mark or classify pre-2000, post-2000. I mean, again, we'll
Yeah,
figure it out, but
It becomes tough, because
Yeah.
there's a lot of different things, types of things out there that we have to figure out how do we count. them.
yeah, and then you have the, granny apartments or whatever you want to call
Yeah, we
mother-in-law
have
apartments.
a lot of, cottages.
There's
You
one
know.
that's just, there's one that's got 5. Last question, on Stefanoni 4 Pheasant Run, wasn't that approved for 16 units?
What? No, I wouldn't say that. I've spent a lot of time trying to figure out how to reflect that in the chart. And I said, at this point, why don't we just put an unknown rather than a certainty? Because I think what the commission's decision was basically uncertainty, that with the issue with the sight line coming off, and
They didn't get an approval?
I would say they did not get an approval.
Okay. Because the 8 on the other one.
Is certain, that's it.
That's been approved.
That's a legit approval.
That's an approval that's been upheld by the court, 8 units, 5 market rate, 3 affordable.
Because
That
it
is,
was 4, it got appealed, and went to 8.
yeah, that is not pending in court, that is a solid approval.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, project status update, not much?
There's only one thing, Parklands, you may recall, we brought it before the commission for some perennial plantings to be done. Those have been done, and they expect to have them done tomorrow. Dave and/or I is going out Thursday, and that will complete that project, and we'll return whatever bond they posted for those plantations.
And is a permanent CEO going to be?
Permanent CO has been issued for that.
Okay, got it.
People moved in.
Oh, wow.
So at some point, that'd probably be something we might want to set up a tour.
They'd be happy, they've already said,
yeah,
anytime
yeah.
people want to come by, let them know.
So I don't know if you want to do it together or something, maybe
We just do
without.
it separately.
Yeah, or separately, whatever you want to do, yeah.
Have an open house every Saturday.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was
so-
thinking about going to one of
Okay.
those.
With regards to releasing the bond, isn't it after one growing season?
I'm gonna have to see what the commission did. I just printed the resolution.
Okay.
I have
This
to reread
was,
the minutes.
this was as a reaction to
Bad weather.
the bad weather, so I thought
think-
maybe we
I'll
originally
double
didn't
check
have a
that.
bond on that. It was, they couldn't complete it within the timeline, so I think we added the bond after the fact with an
I'll
amendment.
check on that, see,
I
that's one thing I
think
want to
so.
check.
Okay, calendar update, next meeting's the May 28th.
May 28th, public hearing and a general meeting. Some of the hearings, originally there were 6 or 7 hearings, I think 2 or 3 are going to drop off. So we'll get decisions on Diller and DHS, and maybe we'll deliberate on some of the zoning stuff we discussed tonight.
Yeah, that would be great. And then other business, I don't see Mr. Gleason, are we going to still cover that?
Nope, Mr. Keating is here to cover
Okay.
that
Okay, so
topic.
I need a vote to go into other business, please.
I move we go into other business.
Second.
All in favor?
Yeah, we have 2 topics under other business, which would be Lombardi on West Elm Street and the
Oh, that's
February
right.
5th minutes.
Oh, yeah.
This thing is-
So let's go Lombardi first. Don't let me forget
I
the
love
fifth.
when you do this.
Dave, relax.
I just, this is awesome. This is always 100% correct.
Dave Keating, zoning enforcement officer.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
And as you recall, this is the property on 8 West
Dave.
Elm
Keep on
Street.
to go to the
Had
right
a drainage
mic.
problem that was-
Dave.
Rookie, microphone.
Microphone, Dave. Thank you, Dave.
This is your first time.
It's been a while for him.
It's getting late.
Yes, this property at 8 West Elm Street had the drainage problem that was constantly seeping into the parking area at McGuan Field. And they came back to the commission last year and got approval for a revised site plan and additional drainage work. That has not yet been implemented. Their engineer has said it's still going to be a problem. So he's worked with Parks and Recreation and the Public Works Department to create this new plan that would include a curtain drain, and the curtain drain would be on the private property. The curtain drain would catch the water before it seeps under the wall and into the town property. Then the water would be piped, put into a catch basin, and then piped into the town property. Another catch basin would be built on the town property. A long pipe would be built through the grass area, not the parking lot, but the grass area. And then another catch basin would be built, and then there would be a pipe that connects from that third catch basin into the existing town catch basin in the parking area. Parks and Rec is okay with this plan. Public Works is okay with this plan and concept. They still have some engineering details to work out. But your approval specifically said all they can do on town property is clean up the mess that they made, no additional site work. So we're working with Wilder Gleason, who may be representing the property owner, and with the engineer. So we want the commission to amend their approval to allow site work to take place on the town property, subject to the final engineering details being approved by the Public Works Department, and a permit being issued by the Public Works Department, and they will require a performance bond. And the second thing we want the commission to do is to require the connection into the storm drainage system on the town property, and that gives Public Works the ability to approve the project. And then the third thing that they've asked for is the reduction of the performance bond, because if they have to do a performance bond for the Public Works permit, that would duplicate one of the performance bonds required by the Planning and Zoning Commission. And they're also asking the Planning and Zoning Commission to reduce the maintenance bond that would be held for 1 year after the work is completed. So Public Works is on board. They would supervise the work, that it would all be done at the expense of the applicant. And Public Works would be in charge of making sure that it gets done correctly.
So can I just ask one question? What happened with the original plan that was just wrong? Was the property wetter than everybody expected?
I think there were two things. One is that the ground conditions were not tested properly to see how absorbent they were. And the original plan did not include the footing drain where they took what might have been an 800 square foot basement 6 feet down in the ground. And the new plan included 1,800 square feet, 8 feet down in the ground. And once you create a path for the groundwater, it will follow that path. So they basically
Dug into a spring, if you will,
exactly
underground
they
spring.
basically dug into a spring, and now they've got to deal with it, kind of thing. So, and part of the problem was they weren't dealing with it, and it was just leaching into the town property and creating that
Moldy
algae problem.
algae mess on the parking lot. Okay.
So,
And that's
there
when
were-
we got involved. We tried to remedy it. That remedy has not remedied it. That proposal, that action has not remedied it. So now, based on your views
We think.
and Public Works' initial views, we think
Right.
that this will finalize.
Right, this plan, designed by Jim Casudis, who was hired by Mr. Lombardi, has,
Which is the second guy.
Third
Third,
engineer.
no, that's
Yeah,
third.
it's the third guy.
Oh, yeah.
The
Who
third
was
en-
the second guy?
the second was Mr. Devanzo of Fairfield County Engineering, and the first was Hemkona. So this is their third engineer on this project.
Was that the guy I call him the Russian, seems like a Russian gentleman to me, or a Scandinavian gentleman, that I said, "You gonna fix this, right?" And he said, "Yeah."
The second.
The second gentleman was Mr. Devanzo, has white hair,
No, it
No,
wasn't.
no,
and
no,
then
it
Mr.
wasn't.
Casudis
That's the
was
guy.
the most recent at the hearing.
So that guy came up with a plan already, and he scrapped his own plan.
Well, that they continue to have this problem with the water leaching onto town property. So we've been working with him since January on this, trying to get a plan that Public Works is happy with, that Parks and Rec is happy with, that tries to alleviate the problem while at the same time minimizing any impacts to the parking lot, and specifically putting a catch basin at the edge of their property, and then some other work on town
Okay,
property.
so my other concern is, we're in the heat of Little League baseball, right?
Yep.
So can they do this without impacting the parking area,
They don't talk
without
about-
eliminating parking spots, I guess?
they're not-
They could,
they're not-
so,
I
or
would
should we,
think that they can,
okay.
in terms of, it's been located to be in that grass
Yeah.
area.
All right, I would just
We'll
call that
continue
out
to
with DPW
work
and
with
Parks
them
and
on
Rec, if they maybe might want to just wait until the heat of the baseball season, Little League season is over.
I think you're losing one parking space, right? Which is this one.
I don't know how much equipment they have. I'm just
You mean,
trying to-
I don't think so permanently.
Yeah.
I think
Right,
there might
it's
be
not
some
permanent.
temporary disturbance. I'm not
Yeah.
sure of anything permanent.
Or the weekends that
So how
they
long-
make sure that they're not encroaching on the parking lot. I just, they take off 4 or 5 parking spots, that's a problem back
Because a
there.
backloader's sitting there, or they
Yeah.
need their Bobcat, or.
Right.
That's my point.
Yes, I agree with that.
How long will this plan take?
Once we can get everyone on board,
Huh?
I don't think it takes that long to build.
Like days?
A week.
Yeah,
I would
a
guess,
week.
yeah, what both of you, probably a week.
And then they can finish everything, like, 'cause the front
Well-
of the yard is still.
At that point, they would proceed. My sense is that they would just finish off this project in its entirety.
Yes.
Okay, great. And then the performance bond and the maintenance for 1 year, those are two separate, correct?
I think at this point, the commission has required 2 bonds. I think that's something we can come back to you in a couple weeks with more details on, once we get everyone on board, and what Public Works may require in terms of a bond, that we can kind of coordinate it.
So they're not getting double whammied on the
Yeah.
bonds, okay.
Do we know if this is a spec house? I mean, is this
No,
being
they
built
live
for?
there.
The sense I get is Mr. Lombardi, there's 2 Mr. Lombardis, Mario, and it's his brother,
Luigi.
Lou Lombardi, who lives at this. So my belief is, he's gonna live here at least for a while. He's not, Mr. Lombardi is not a builder, he's not a developer, he doesn't do that for a living. Now, he might eventually leave, but I think he's less of a developer than, say, others.
My concern is all this runs through ultimately the town sewer system. And it's comforting to know DPW accepts it and so on and so forth, but in 3 years' time, if this thing doesn't work and there's algae all over the parking lot, who takes care of it? The DPW gonna take care of it?
I think
Or
those are the types of details that Public Works is gonna be very adamant they get worked out properly, and that's why they're gonna work with Mr. Lombardi on the details of who maintains what, who constructs what as-builts need to be presented to Public Works, which engineer needs to be present to watch all this
Okay.
go in.
Long as
So there's,
Yeah,
these details
they're on
need to be
top
worked
of it,
out,
yeah.
absolutely,
Talking
Jim, I
together,
agree with you.
Yeah.
So the one thing I would add, I think the same thing, they would have to file a maintenance plan
Right.
with the land records,
That's
right?
it, yes.
Yep.
It's on this, so maintenance or easement agreement.
Right.
Haven't finalized yet.
All right, so what do you need from us tonight to progress?
Last question,
Yep,
or maybe 1.5 questions, sorry, John. It talks about the bond, $30,000, point C, 1 and 2, adds up to 30. Was it posted on May 30th, 2018?
no,
It wasn't.
It
So
was
they're in
not.
violation.
that's correct.
all the more so.
Okay, so.
It was
what-
posted after
what is
that.
it? They're reducing one or the other.
Right,
They want this 30 to go down,
yes,
and they've never posted it anyway.
they can, yeah, they said, we're having trouble posting the bond, and we've talked to them about different ways to post it, how they can post
You
it,
built a
different, what the town's
$1.5
requirements.
million house.
Well, they haven't sold the house.
Doesn't matter.
I-
You still paid contractors
Yeah,
at $300
certainly.
a foot.
Certainly, there's no doubt they've paid people to build the house,
Okay,
but they have not posted the bond per the P and Z approval.
so they're in violation.
All right, that's helpful.
So all we need from you guys tonight is the requirement for the connection, the authorization for the connection details to be worked out with Public Works.
I think this plan's good.
And the modification of the resolution that says no site work on the town.
Town property.
Okay,
Both are okay as submitted. Can I get a motion?
motion to approve.
Jennifer,
I saw two motions in the papers, didn't I? One, the no working, and two, the reduction of the bond. We don't
Oh,
want to
you-
reduce the bond, do we?
No, we're not
Nope.
touching the bond tonight. That's right.
correct.
So how many
Because we
issues
don't know
are
those
there?
numbers yet.
Again,
We'll get those
state-
numbers from Public Works.
State the issues for Mr. Rand. It's,
No work
Nope.
on
No
town
work.
property,
Right.
which is a modification of the prior
so
condition.
we're allowing work on town
And
property.
to order the connection to the public system,
Okay.
which we don't, the only way Public Works will let people connect is
If we-
either
Approve
with,
it.
with P and Z,
Okay, but so the bond remains, at least for the time being.
with the commission open to a discussion of that,
Yeah, but that's
but
not.
disappointed that it wasn't originally filed.
Extremely,
With the money in our hands,
extremely,
not in their
extremely
hands.
disappointed. Like, they caused a problem. They tried to remedy it. They haven't kept their end of the bargain. I want them to be very clear of that.
Yep.
Mr. Gleason should be aware. Okay, so can I get a motion to approve work on the property and connection to this town sewer system?
I had Jennifer, yes?
Motion to
I'll
Sam,
second.
second?
All in favor?
4-0, thank you.
Okay, and then one other quick item. Based on the RTM meeting, we realized that one of the minutes didn't get posted and there was an omission. We're going back to February 5th. Fred, you want to tell us about it?
This was just a quick omission of the commission's decision regarding Highland Farm. So we went back and added the decision with the adopted resolution in the minutes. I can pass this around if you'd like.
Is this the one that you emailed us today?
Yes. That part of the meeting never made it in the minutes. Who made the motion? Who seconded the motion? What the vote was for that resolution?
Right, so the commission just needs to vote tonight to adopt these amended minutes, and
We'll post them to the
We'll post
website.
them on the website.
exactly.
I move that the amended minutes be accepted or approved.
Second?
All in favor? All right,
4-0, thank you.
just throw them up on the website. It's,
Yep.
you know, given that it's an issue out there. So that's it. Could we get a motion? Thanks for the other items. Get a motion to adjourn.
Dave?
Jennifer? Mr. Rand, all in favor? For zip, TV 79, we're off. Bonnie, we are off.